Hi guys, tonight we ease back through a fog so thick it feels like a damp blanket pulled over your shoulders, and you find yourself drifting into Victorian London's most notorious quarter. You stand at the edge of Whitechapel, where narrow streets glisten with coal soot and lanterns flicker in windows stretched thin by poverty. You can almost smell the damp bricks and the lingering tang of smoke that clings to every surface. It is peaceful for a moment, just enough to settle your breath, though you know that if you had actually lived here, you probably would not survive this for long. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I would love to know where you are listening from tonight, along with your local time. Now dim the lights, and you step forward without breaking the rhythm of your breathing as the city folds around you. You trudge beneath a gas lamp whose glass is stained from decades of soot, the glow inside trembling as if nervous to shine. The air carries a low hum, not loud enough to disturb your calm, but constant enough to remind you that thousands of people live only a few cramped steps away. You feel the slick cobblestones under your feet, each faint tap a soft reminder that this part of London never sleeps fully. A mainstream fact whispers its way through your thoughts. By the late 19th century, Whitechapel held some of the densest urban populations in Europe, with entire blocks crushed under overcrowding and chronic poverty. Yet for all that weight, the night still feels strangely gentle, as if the fog itself is eager to soften every sharp edge. You pass a leaning building. The timber frame bows inwards as though it has spent the last 100 years sighing under its own exhaustion. A tiny window sits crooked above you, glowing from a candle that struggles against the damp. Someone moves behind the glass. The shadow shifts. You wonder if they are preparing for work or simply trying to warm their hands. The wind nudges the smell of coal smoke towards you, mixed with cooking grease from some unseen kitchen. It is not pleasant, but it is familiar in a way that makes the scene feel lived in rather than threatening. You pause near a doorway where a cat curls atop a bundle of discarded rags. A quirky tidbit creeps up. Victorian London had so many stray cats that newspapers joked about them forming unofficial night watch patrols. You look at this one, its ears twitching as the fog dampens its fur. It seems entirely at home here, unlike you who still feel like an intruder stepping into someone's fragile nighttime world. A carriage rattles somewhere ahead, wheels skidding lightly over wet stones. The driver mutters something to the horse, though the words dissolve into the haze before they reach you. That haze feels almost alive, moving, with your breaths sliding past your cheeks, ready to swallow anything more than a few feet away. Historians still argue whether the ever-present London fog was exaggerated in popular memory or genuinely as suffocating as witnesses described. But standing here, even in imagination, you sense why the debate persists. The fog is not mere weather. It is atmosphere. It is mood. It is a curtain pulled over the city, so the rest of London does not have to look directly at its own neglected districts. A distant clang echoes from within the labyrinth of alleys. Maybe a pot dropped, maybe a shop shutter fell. Maybe a worker knocked off the last of their tasks before stumbling into whatever bed space they can afford. You drift toward the sound, guided by curiosity rather than caution, feet leading you deeper into Whitechapel's tangled veins. You walk slowly, no rush, letting the fog cradle your steps. Your sleeve brushes a brick wall slick with condensation. You trace the texture lightly, feeling the gritty cold press back. In a world without insulation, without regulated heating, every surface becomes either damp or frozen, depending on the season. Tonight it is damp heavy enough that each breath feels weighty, but also grounding, pulling you fully into this moment. A soft murmur reaches you from an alley to your left, a couple of voices overlapping, one low and tired, the other sharper, like someone bargaining or pleading. Arguments here are rarely about grand ideas. More often, they revolve around pennies, hours of work, bits of bread, scraps of fabric, or the cost of a place to sleep. You do not intrude. You simply pass by the fog, acting as a gentle veil that protects both you and them. You reach a corner where the street widens just enough for a faded sign to hang overhead. It rocks quietly, from a chain creaking with each shift of the wind. You cannot read most of the painted letters anymore. Time has peeled them back until only a ghost of the message remains. But you suspect it once welcomed customers to a shop, or tavern maybe, a gathering place that could cram a few dozen people inside on a lucky evening. Now it simply exists suspended between usefulness and decay. A puddle ripples under your boot as you step past it. You watch the fog swirl on the water's surface. London's slums were often described as places where the ground itself seemed unhealthy, a phrase that slips into your thoughts as you notice the oily sheen floating on top of the puddle. Still, the sight is strangely calming when the world is so quiet. You picture the rain earlier, washing soot from rooftops and settling dust from crowded factories. It leaves behind reflections that feel like tiny stories. A figure moves ahead wrapped in a coat that has seen far better decades. They shuffle toward you, nod politely, and drift past without a word. You sense how ordinary this exchange is. People did not stop to chat much here at night, unless they had to. Silence was safer. But when you catch the faint scent of pipe smoke trailing behind them, it feels oddly comforting, like a human marker in a landscape that sometimes forgets to show its humanity. You keep going, letting the fog become almost part of your skin. The city narrows again as the street bends and the darkness thickens. A single lantern flickers on a wall bracket, its flame quivering, as if startled by your presence. You lean closer, noticing cobwebs hugging the metal frame, each thread beaded with moisture that glints in the weak light. You imagine the spider that crafted it perhaps living unnoticed above the sign, surviving quietly in a city that rarely notices anything small. You pause again, breathing in slowly. You hear a soft drip from a gutter overhead, the rhythmic tapping blending with the distant rumble of a train, far across the city. That mixture of close and far sounds creates a cocoon around you, the intimate noise of the slum layered over the vast machinery of the wider world. London is enormous, but here within these few cramped streets, it feels intimate enough to cradle you like a whispered bedtime tale. You turn one last corner and a new scent meets you. Boiled potatoes, damp wool, a tiny hint of soap powder drifting from an open doorway. Someone is finishing their washing late into the night, because in these districts, time bends around necessity rather than comfort. Your shoulders lower, your breath steadies. You feel ready to slip deeper, ready to learn more, ready to follow this story wherever it leads next. You ease forward into the dim hush of early morning, your footsteps soft enough that they barely disturb the alley cats winding between crates. The night fog lifts just slightly, pulling apart like a curtain that has grown tired of hanging. A pale greyness settles over Whitechapel, inviting you to witness the quiet rituals that begin long before the respectable parts of London bother to stir. You feel the air change. It is cooler now, sharper, carrying the faint metallic tang of wet iron mixed with something earthier. This is the hour when the rag pickers claim the streets, and you find yourself drifting into their world. You move toward a faint rustling sound near a pile of rubbish heaped against a crumbling wall. A figure bends over it with slow, deliberate motions, their silhouette outlined by the weak glow from a nearby window. You approach gently, keeping your steps light, as though you might startle the dawn itself if you make too much noise. A mainstream historical fact nudges its way into your awareness. By the later Victorian years, tens of thousands of people survived in London as rag pickers, bone grubbers, and pure finders combing through refuse to gather anything they could sell for a halfpenny or two. The city's waste system was barely coordinated, so scavengers operated almost like an unofficial workforce, turning chaos into survival. The rag picker in front of you wears a coat so patched it resembles a quilt of mismatched greys. Their hands move quickly, despite the cold sorting scraps of cloth, bits of rope, fragments of paper, softened by rain. You watch as they tap each item against their palm, testing its worth with a practiced rhythm. A small sack hangs at their side, already lumpy with the night's findings. You catch the faint scent of damp cloth mixed with coal dust as the breeze shifts. There is something strangely soothing about the methodical nature of their work. Step-stoop sorts sigh, over and over, a quiet dance repeated through the generations. You step around another puddle, its surface shimmering with early light, and follow the rag picker as they shuffle to the next heap. You hear the gentle clink of glass as they pull out a small bottle, hold it up to the faint light, and then slip it into their sack. A quirky tidbit sparks in your mind. Victorian scavengers often collected old bottles stamped with embossed brand names, and some even bragged that they could identify perfumes by smell alone, despite never affording a single drop. Standing here, you imagine this rag picker lifting each bottle, giving a tiny sniff and dreaming of fragrances lost to time. You inhale slowly, letting the morning deepen around you. Farther down the street, you notice more figures emerging from the fog, bending over piles of refuse left behind by taverns, bakeries, and butcher stalls. The soundscape grows richer, soft scraping of metal against stone-hushed murmurs. Between scavengers, comparing finds a cartwheel, creaking as someone pushes a load toward a dealer. The slum might seem dormant to outsiders, but to you, it feels like the city's hidden heartbeat, pulsing steadily long before the upper classes open their curtains. A woman with a woolen shawl passes you, dragging a small child by the hand. The child clutches a broken basket, empty now, but soon to be filled with scraps. You hear the woman whisper instructions, coaching the child on which materials are worth taking and which attract trouble from bigger pickers. You feel your chest tighten slightly as you realize this child might be working before learning to read or write. Historians still argue whether the majority of slum children worked out of absolute necessity or cultural expectation, but either way, the result was the same. Childhood here blended seamlessly with labour each day, blurring into the next before the sun was even up. You turn onto a narrow lane littered with fragments of the city's discarded life, broken toys, shredded paper, bones stripped clean from last night's stew pots, a cracked boot sole, a rusted hinge. You crouch down, brushing your fingers lightly over a smooth shard of blue pottery. For a moment you wonder who once held the cup this fragment belonged to. You sense how these small forgotten objects carried stories that seldom made it into polite conversation. Every scrap was a clue to life in a city stretching itself toward modernity while leaving entire districts behind. The rag picker ahead of you pauses to stretch their back joints, cracking quietly in the stillness. You see their breath puff into the cold morning air, drifting upward like a thin ghost. You imagine how many hours they must spend bent double, rummaging through the remains of other people's comforts. The work is exhausting, repetitive, often degrading, yet there is dignity in the persistence, a kind of stubborn resilience that holds communities like this together. You move onward, taking in the growing light. A cart stands near the crossroads, its wooden bed piled with sorted rubbish rags. On one side, bones, on the other, bits of metal in a canvas sack at the back. The dealer leans against the wheel, sipping something from a tin mug. Steam rises from the drink, curling into the cold air like a whispered secret. They nod at a rag picker who approaches, weighing a handful of scrap cloth with a scale so old the numbers have nearly rubbed off. Coins clink. A transaction made, a life prolonged for another day. You step closer and catch a whiff of something tangy and smoky, a combination that prickles your senses, but somehow feels warm. The dealer's horse shifts its hooves, snorting gently as it watches the scene. A thin coating of frost clings to its mane. The moment feels suspended, delicate, almost peaceful in its routine. As the sun edges higher, the slum begins to stir in fuller measure. Windows creak open, laundry lines sway slightly overhead. A kettle whistles weakly from a nearby room. You pass another heap of refuse, where an older man sorts metal fragments with surprising speed. He glances at you as if wondering why you're not carrying a sack of your own, then returns to his task without comment. You pause, listening. The morning chorus builds gradually, footsteps on cobblestones, low murmurs, a splash of water emptied from a window, a child laughing softly at some tiny discovery in the trash. You close your eyes for a slow breath, letting the atmosphere settle into you. The calmness of the routine wraps around your shoulders like a threadbare blanket that still carries warmth. You move again, feeling the rhythm of this world guiding your pace. A dog trots past carrying a half-chewed bone, proudly in its mouth. A woman shakes out a rag from her doorway, scattering dust motes that glimmer as the rising sun finally claws through the fog. Light settles on the street in pale ribbons, illuminating the refuse heaps like strange treasure mounds. You watch the rag pickers continue their work, each one moving with quiet focus. You sense the fragile ecosystem of poverty here. Every scrap matters. Every movement counts. Nothing can be wasted. The sun climbs a little higher, and the fog thins until the slum gradually reveals itself fully, as though waking reluctantly from a heavy sleep. You take one last look at the morning scene. The scavengers still sift through the city's cast-offs, but now with a touch more energy as daylight strengthens. The rhythm of their work becomes almost hypnotic, a steady cadence of survival that somehow soothes you rather than saddens you. You feel yourself drawn onward deeper into the maze where other stories wait. You drift farther along the awakening streets, letting the soft grey light guide you toward a tangled wedge of alleys that locals whisper about with equal parts resignation and humour. You feel the space tighten around you, the air growing thicker, as the buildings lean in close like nosy neighbours who want to eavesdrop on every breath you take. This is where the rookeries begin, the infamous labyrinths, where poverty, overcrowding, and improvisation combine to shape a world unlike any other corner of Victorian London. You step forward slowly, the cobblestones growing narrower and more uneven beneath your feet, as if warning you that turning back would be far easier than pushing deeper. You pass under a low arch that forces you to duck your head. The wood above it is warped and blackened from decades of coal smoke drifting upward. A mainstream historical fact anchors your thoughts. By the mid-19th century, entire rookeries squeezed hundreds of people into crumbling tenements, originally built for a few families, their rooms subdivided so aggressively that some spaces barely fit a mattress. You feel the truth of that fact as you brush against damp brick walls that rise only inches from your shoulders. You sense how every inch of space here must have carried value. You emerge into a passage so narrow you could stretch out your arms and touch both sides without effort. Laundry lines sag overhead, dripping yesterday's rain onto your collar. A cart tries to pass but cannot, so its owner mutters and folds the handles inward before inching through sideways. You catch the scent of stale cabbage wet stone and the faint sweetness of yeast from a nearby bakery, attempting to stay afloat in the slum economy. The mixture should be unpleasant, yet the atmosphere feels strangely intimate, as if the entire neighbourhood is pressing itself around you in a slow, unhurried embrace. A child darts past your legs, giggling as they chase another through the maze of alleys. Their bare feet slap the stones with a rhythm that echoes up the walls. For a moment, the rookery feels like a hive, buzzing softly with the day's early energy. Somewhere above you, a window slams, followed by a voice shouting something indiscernible. You glance upward and see faces briefly framed in dim bedrooms, half curious, half weary. Many families in these rookeries shared single rooms, with strangers renting boards or corners for a few pennies a night. You imagine the arguments, the whispered confidences, the exhausted silences held within those cramped spaces. You continue walking your fingertips, brushing the rough brick as you slide sideways through another tight turn. A quirky fact rises to mind. Some rookeries included secret back passages built by residents over decades, allowing people to slip between buildings, escape police patrols, or reach shared privies without stepping onto the main street. You squint down a narrow slit between two houses that barely looks wide enough for a cat, much less a person, and you wonder how many hurried footsteps disappeared into shadows there. A faint dripping sound echoes from somewhere behind you, maybe from a leaky gutter or a wash basin emptied from an upstairs window. You duck instinctively, but nothing splashes you this time. The ground beneath your boots grows slick, and you adjust your pace, choosing each step carefully. The rookery floor feels alive with shifting textures, patches of mud, bits of straw, scattered bones from last night's meals, cinders from nearby hearths. You sense how every surface here has been walked on, slept on, spilled on, lived on. Voices weave through the tight alley like threads of conversation drifting from unseen corners. A murmured prayer overlaps with someone complaining about the price of bread. A mother calls her child with a tone that blends scolding and affection. A man laughs abruptly, his voice echoing sharply in the confined space. You feel these sounds settle around you, becoming part of the rookery's own quiet chorus. The acoustics distort everything slightly, as if the walls themselves reinterpret each voice before sending it back out. A doorway opens on your right, and warm air spills into the alley, carrying the scent of boiled oats. Inside, you glimpse a single room, where 4 adults and 2 children gather around a chipped table. They have pushed their beds against the walls, leaving a narrow path between them. One child waves at you shyly, before someone herds them back inside with a gentle pat. Historians still debate how much of rookery life was defined by community, and how much by conflict, but standing here observing this brief domestic moment, you feel how fragile and flexible that balance must have been. You step onward, drawn by a faint line of daylight that seems to promise a wider space ahead. The alley bends again, and suddenly you enter a courtyard, barely large enough to turn around in. Several doors open into it, their wooden frames swollen from years of moisture. A cat perched on a barrel looks at you with a kind of unimpressed expression only a slum cat can manage. You smile softly and keep moving, noticing cracks in the walls filled with makeshift repairs, strips of wood, nailed into place old cloth stuffed into gaps, mismatched bricks, mortared by hand. A woman stands near a washtub, wringing out clothing, with brisk movements that send droplets flying. She nods at you, but does not pause. Her sleeves are rolled up, revealing forearms strong from labour. She glances toward a staircase that spirals upward, along the side of a building, inviting you with a kind of crooked charm. You take the invitation, silently placing your hand on the railing. The wood is smooth from decades of palms sliding over it. You ascend slowly, hearing each step creak beneath your weight. Halfway up, you glance into a window left open for ventilation. Inside is a room so small you could probably reach across it in 2 strides. A mattress lies on the floor, patched in several places. A crate serves as a table, holding a battered teapot and a chipped cup. In the corner sits a single wooden chair, its back bent slightly, as though exhausted from years of service. You imagine the stories whispered in this room. Joys, grievances, secrets that stayed trapped between these walls. You reach the landing at the top and pause. A faint breeze moves through the narrow upper corridor, carrying with it the scent of bread, baking somewhere in the distance. The morning sun touches the rooftops above you, turning each chimney into a soft silhouette. The rooftop seems strangely peaceful, rising gently above the tangled world below. You follow the corridor to another set of stairs, leading down, keeping close to the wall as you descend carefully. Your boots hit the ground, just as someone opens a door nearby. A man steps out carrying a bucket of water. He greets you with a nod and empties the bucket into the gutter. The water flows slowly down the alley, tracing the cobblestones like a quiet river. Sunlight catches the stream, turning it momentarily golden before it slips into shadow. You stand still for a moment, savouring the layered textures of sound, smell, and motion that surround you. The rookery feels chaotic, yet familiar, claustrophobic, yet strangely comforting. Every crevice holds a story, and every turn offers another glimpse of lives shaped by scarcity and perseverance. You sense the weight of history pressing close, wrapping its long, complicated arms around you as gently as the fog did earlier. You take one last deep breath, letting the atmosphere settle inside you. Then you continue forward, knowing the maze will keep unfolding as long as you choose to walk it. You walk deeper into the warren of alleys until a sharp, unmistakable odour reaches you. It rises slowly at first, like steam lifting off a cooling pot, and then swells into something far denser. Your nose twitches instinctively because this part of the slum introduces you to one of Victorian London's most unrelenting realities, waste in all its forms, drifting through the streets with the same stubbornness as the fog. You brace yourself, but you keep moving, guided by the faint splashes and clinks somewhere ahead. As you turn a corner, the passage narrows again, and a grimy gutter channels a thin ribbon of grey water past your boots. Its surface ripples with every distant footstep, and every bucket emptied from an unseen window above. The sound is steady, almost rhythmic, like the heartbeat of a district doing its best to function, despite the odds. You inhale through your mouth to soften the smell, though the air still carries its thick mix of coal smoke, rotting food, damp wood, and something heavier that settles into the fabric of the entire neighbourhood. A pair of figures crouch near a brick wall, scraping at something with long-handled tools. Their movements are slow and practiced, and you approach with quiet curiosity. A widely accepted historical observation resurfaces in your thoughts as you watch them. Most slum streets in Victorian London lacked proper sewers, leaving many families dependent on night soil workers to remove human waste by hand. You feel a shiver of sympathy for the men in front of you, whose labour unfolds long before polite society opens its curtains. One of the workers glances your way, his face creased and smeared with grime, but not unfriendly. He swings a bucket upright, its contents sloshing in a way you decide not to analyse too closely. You step aside respectfully, letting him pass. The bucket emits a pungent wave that curls around your ankles. You notice how he steadies his foot on the uneven stones, as if every step could betray him. The tools clatter lightly. As he moves, the metal tips dulled from years of scraping at surfaces no tool deserves. A splash sounds behind you, prompting you to glance upward. A shutter swings inward, and someone empties a basin from the second floor. A sheet of murky water cascades down, hitting the stones with a dull slap. Droplets pepper your sleeve cool and startling against your skin. For a brief moment, you think about how many thousands of people relied on this same method of waste disposal day after day. The slum's walls seem to exhale that knowledge right back at you. You push onward and find yourself beside a communal privy tucked between two leaning buildings. The door hangs crooked, its hinges rusted and tired. A man emerges, nodding politely, and you catch a faint mixture of relief and embarrassment in his expression. Daily necessities here were rarely private. Space was too limited, time too short, and resources too strained for modesty to take priority. You hear a baby crying somewhere inside one of the houses, and the sound drifts through a crack in the wall like a breeze. You step around the privy, following the rattle of a wooden cart. A woman pushes it slowly, her arms steady, despite her slight frame. The cart is loaded with rags buckets and a collection of mismatched tools. She hums to herself as she works her voice, soft, almost soothing. A detail rarely mentioned in schoolbooks surfaces in your mind. Some women in the slums made small incomes cleaning out cesspits or collecting ash to sell as fertilizer. You observe the quiet pride in her posture, as though the work provides structure even when comfort is scarce. The cart creaks to a stop, and she lifts a lid covering a crude pit. Steam wafts upward, mingling with the cool morning air. You take a step back automatically, but your respect for her resilience deepens. She glances at you and gives a short nod, as if acknowledging that you have now witnessed a truth often tucked away in Victorian novels. She returns to her work, humming once more, rhythm steady and unbothered. You continue your slow path along the alley, letting the atmosphere seep into your thoughts. The ground grows muddier here, and you feel your boots sink slightly with each step. A couple of children sit nearby, poking at a small heap of broken pottery with sticks. They giggle as one shard clinks against another. The smallest child proudly holds up a piece of glazed blue ceramic. You smile gently, knowing they likely have no idea what the shard once belonged to, but it has become a treasure for the morning. A researcher might still debate why some slum districts were maintained with sporadic municipal attention, while others remained almost untouched by public reform for decades. You sense that uncertainty in the air itself, as though the neighbourhood has been shaped by unequal winds of oversight and neglect. You wonder how the residents interpreted those choices while living through them. Did they hope for change or simply adapt with the patience born from necessity? You duck your head when another window creaks open. This time a woman peeks out and shakes crumbs from a cloth. The crumbs fall like tiny brown snowflakes, landing on the stones with soft taps. Pigeons swoop in almost instantly, fluttering so close to your hair that their wings stir the air beside your cheek. You chuckle quietly, startled but amused. The woman disappears back inside without a word, her curtain falling shut with a whisper. A cool breeze filters through the alley, carrying a faint trace of soap mingled with industrial fumes from some distant workshop. You feel the temperature of the breeze shift slightly as it moves past heaps of refuse. The city's smells change block by block, sometimes house by house, even the waste seems stratified. The refuse from a bakery smells different from the refuse behind a butcher, and the stink near the boarding houses has its own unmistakable signature that you try not to dwell on. You pass a stack of wooden crates, each branded with faded letters. One crate holds bundles of straw that have soaked up so much moisture they almost collapse under their own weight. Another is filled with empty jugs overturned and rolled into one another. You reach out and touch the rough surface of the crate. The wood is cold, swollen from rain, and slightly slimy. You let your hand fall back to your side, wiping your fingertips lightly on your trousers. Even that small gesture feels true to the slum's lived reality. An old man sits on a stool nearby, smoking a pipe with the slow, meditative rhythm of someone who has had decades to perfect the habit. His eyes track a cat weaving between two barrels. The smoke from his pipe curls lazily around him, forming a soft halo in the dim air. He notices you and gives a quiet grunt of acknowledgement. You sense no hostility, only the mild curiosity of someone who has seen everything twice already. You keep walking, tracing the edges of the slum's hidden routines. Every few steps you hear the distant splash of water, the scrape of tools, the chatter of early morning workers, discussing something you cannot make out. You wonder how they navigate these sensory extremes every day. For you, the smells are intense, but for them, it is simply life. Your boots carry you toward a slightly wider space, where several residents gather around a communal pump. The water gushes with surprising force, splashing loudly into buckets. A young boy holds his tin pail under the stream, grinning as drops bounce off the rim. A woman fills a basin and lifts it with practiced strength, water sloshing against her wrists. You watch her pause to catch her breath. She glances up at the sky, as if checking whether the light is strong enough for wash day. You linger a moment before moving on, letting the sensory world settle around you like a damp cloak. This slum is not gentle, but its rhythms are. Even in filth and struggle, there is a quiet persistence that steadies your heartbeat. You exhale slowly. Another alley opens ahead, beckoning you forward, deeper into the story that London once tried to hide. You ease back into the drifting morning light, letting the damp air settle around your shoulders as you emerge from the narrowest alleys. Ahead of you, the slum widens just enough to form a small open square, and before you even step fully into it, a series of sharp melodic cries start cutting through the haze. The voices overlap, rising and falling like a street-bound orchestra tuning itself for the day ahead. You pause for a moment, drawn toward the sound with the same gentle curiosity that prompted you deeper into the rookery earlier. This is where the street sellers gather their voices, weaving the first lively threads into the slum's morning tapestry. You step closer, the cobblestones beneath your boots still slick from the night's condensation. A patch of sunlight slips between two leaning buildings, catching the edges of baskets, wooden crates, and wheeled carts as the sellers arrange their goods. A factual slice of Victorian life, Flickers into your mind records from the late 19th century show that thousands of Londoners survived entirely through street vending, selling everything from hot pies to second-hand knickknacks without ever owning a stall or shop. Their earnings depended as much on stamina as on charm, and you sense that truth in the lively, confident voices warming the air. A man strides past you balancing a tray of roasted chestnuts. The tray sits strapped around his neck, steam curling upward in soft puffs that smell faintly sweet and earthy. He taps a metal scoop rhythmically against the rim each clink, adding percussion to the rising chorus. His call rings out in a bright cadence, advertising chestnuts too hot to touch. You can almost feel the warmth from the tray against your chilled fingers. He catches your eye and offers a half smile, the kind that suggests he could talk you into buying a handful, even if you had sworn you were not hungry. To your left, a young woman arranges bunches of wilted herbs on a cloth spread over the stones. You watch as she lifts. Each bundle shakes off stray leaves and lays them out with a care that seems almost ceremonious. A rarely discussed detail about this era pops into your thoughts. Many herb vendors source their stock from scraps trimmed off by apothecaries or from plants grown in tiny backyard plots squeezed between tenements. You imagine her rising before dawn to water her small patch of soil, hoping the plants were generous enough to keep her fed for another week. Her voice rises in a soft chant advertising penny bundles, the tone surprisingly musical. Children hover around her, curious about the scent of crushed mint and thyme drifting toward them. One child reaches out, and she gently taps his knuckles in warning before offering him a tiny leaf, instead a playful gesture that makes him grin wide. You continue forward, weaving between sellers as the square grows more animated. A man in a frayed coat pushes a cart overflowing with mismatched boots. He lifts each boot with theatrical flair, turning it in the light, shaking it slightly to emphasize its sturdiness. His performance draws a small crowd. Some laugh, some heckle, but everyone seems entertained. You sense the camaraderie that bubbles up even in the hardest corners of the city. A scent of warm bread floats toward you, carried by the breeze. You turn to see an older woman selling rolls from a basket lined with cloth. The rolls are not fresh by high society standards, but they're warm, likely rescued from a bakery that had no interest in keeping yesterday's stock. She tilts her head when she notices you lingering nearby, her eyes bright and mischievous. A curious anecdote rarely mentioned outside specialist histories surfaces in your thoughts. Some bakers intentionally set aside imperfect loaves to sell cheaply through middlewomen like her, knowing the slums relied on these early morning bargains. You watch her press a roll into a customer's hand with surprising tenderness. As the square fills with voices, you start to pick out individual calls. One man rattles coins in a tin to draw attention to his shoelaces. A girl barely taller than her basket sings a short repetitive melody to advertise scraps of ribbon and thread. A pair of teenage boys hoist a crate of apples so bruised they look like artworks of red and gold, smudging into one another. They shout over each other for attention, laughing as they do. You feel warmth rising in the slum despite the cold. The voices wrap around you like overlapping waves, noisy but comforting. A group of women huddle over a table of second-hand clothing. They sift through coats missing buttons, skirts frayed along the hem, and men's shirts patched in half a dozen places. Their fingers work quickly, evaluating stitches, flipping seams, sniffing fabric. Bargaining starts in low tones that quickly rise, and you can hear the cadence of negotiation bouncing back and forth like a practiced game. They haggle with sharp precision, their voices bright and unwavering. In this district, every penny carries the weight of a meal or a roof over someone's head. The sun lifts a little higher, warming the square enough that the seller's breath no longer clouds the air. A faint hum settles beneath the noise, the hum of belonging. This market, informal and fragile though it is, becomes the social anchor of the slum every morning. People gather here, not just to buy or sell, but to swap news, greet neighbours and relay gossip that ripples through the district like a soft current. You step aside to watch a man repairing metal pans. He sits cross-legged beside a crate, tapping dents out with steady, careful strikes of a hammer. Sparks flicker when he hits the metal just right, scattering small stars onto the damp stones. A handful of customers lean in to observe his work, waiting to see whether their battered pans can survive another year. A note from the era's social commentaries surfaces faintly in your mind. Many households in such neighbourhoods owned only a single cooking pot, repaired repeatedly until it disintegrated. You feel a quiet respect for the man's skill as he coaxes each pan back toward usefulness. Behind you, someone begins singing. The voice is low, melodic, almost wistful. You turn to see an elderly vendor selling tin cups and spoons laid out in neat lines. He sings as he works, tapping each utensil lightly to create his own small harmony. His song softens the entire square, pulling the chatter into a gentle lull for several moments. A couple of children sit near him, listening as though hypnotized. You continue moving, letting every step bring another fragment of life into view. A philosophical uncertainty drifts into your thoughts. Researchers still cannot fully agree on whether these bustling morning markets strengthened community ties or merely masked the deeper instability beneath them. Walking here, you suspect the truth exists somewhere in between. People rely on both resilience and illusion to make it through each day. A vendor selling pins catches your attention next. His jacket, though tattered, is decorated with bright metal trinkets that sparkle in the morning light. He gestures dramatically as he describes each item, his words painting stories of luck, love, and good fortune. Customers chuckle as they sift through the pins, letting their fingers brush over the tiny shapes. The vendor's voice carries enthusiasm that seems larger than the space around him. You find yourself slowing down, absorbing the atmosphere with all your senses. The square vibrates with a peculiar charm, lively but grounded, chaotic but strangely peaceful. Every shout, every laugh, every shuffle of feet deepens the scene, adding texture to a world often overlooked. The voices mingle until they become one warm, breathing presence around you. You step toward the edge of the square, glancing back one more time. The sellers continue their calls, their faces lined with determination and humour. The slum may be harsh, but these morning rituals give it a pulse that feels almost celebratory. You inhale deeply, letting the mingled scents of bread, herbs, smoke, and damp cotton wrap around you. Then you move on, guided by the faint echo of the seller's chorus, fading gently behind you as you walk toward the next hidden pocket of life, awaiting you just around the bend. You walk onward until the lively chorus of street sellers fades behind you, replaced by a softer but somehow heavier soundtrack. The slum's narrow roads begin to fill with small footsteps, quick breaths, and the bump of makeshift toys tapping against stone. You feel a faint hollow in your chest as you step into a stretch of roadway where children begin their day long before most adults would like to imagine. Childhood here is not something separate from labour. It is interwoven with its shaping little bodies and little minds that learn to survive faster than they learn to play. You pause as a group of children sprint past you, their bare heels slapping the cold ground. They dart around you with practiced agility, weaving through puddles, barrels, and low archways as though the slum itself were a playground designed for them. Their laughter echoes sharply off the brick walls, bright enough to momentarily soften everything around you. A well-recognised detail from Victorian reports surfaces in your thoughts. Thousands of slum children in London worked from extremely young ages, often beginning casual labour by 5 or 6, and sometimes even earlier. That knowledge settles heavily as you watch one boy lug a sack nearly as large as his own torso. You kneel slightly to make room as a girl trudges by, chin tucked into her chest, arms wrapped around a bundle of wood scraps. She sets the bundle down with a grunt, brushing her hair from her eyes. The wood pieces are odd sizes, probably scavenged from factory refuse to be sold as fire kindling. She catches you looking and offers a shy smile, as though the weight she carries is unremarkable, just part of the morning's routine. The smile fades quickly as she resumes her task, nudging the bundle into a tighter stack with her foot. Farther along, you notice another group of children congregating around a patch of sunlight that warms a small corner of the street. One boy spins a battered metal hoop with a stick, sending it wobbling across the stones. A couple of the younger ones cheer clapping their hands. An obscure little nugget from slum folklore wanders into your mind. Some children made their own toys from broken factory scraps, turning discarded gears, bottle caps, and scraps of wire into tiny treasures. Watching the hoop spin, you understand how creativity thrived even in scarcity. A faint cough echoes nearby. You turn to find a child leaning against a wall, a cloth pressed to her lips as she waits for the fit to pass. Her frame looks delicate, her eyes shadowed. She takes a breath, stands upright, and begins sorting a small pile of coal chips, spread in a tin at her feet. The chips are tiny, almost dust, barely worth much. She separates them with surprising precision, her fingers moving swiftly, despite the cold. The air around her tastes faintly metallic from the coal dust. You swallow gently, imagining what her lungs must feel like. A woman calls out from a nearby doorway, summoning a child who instantly drops a wooden toy and hurries over. The mother hands him a small basket and points toward the main road. You hear the faint word, errands, mixed into her instructions. The boy nods dutifully, tightening his scarf before jogging off. The mother catches your eye briefly, her expression carrying that worn mixture of affection and exhaustion common among parents who depend on their children, not for decoration, but for survival. You continue along the alley, stepping aside to let a girl push a wheeled board loaded with scrap metal. Her hands tremble slightly as she maneuvers the uneven cart over a rut in the stones. You hear her mutter something like, "stuck again," under her breath. You reach out a hand instinctively, but she shakes her head with a stubborn determination that makes you smile faintly. She pushes harder, gets past the rut, then gives a tiny triumphant puff of breath before moving on. The slum grows louder as more children pour into the streets. Some chase pigeons, some help mothers scrub steps or carry buckets, and others begin gathering dirt into little piles that they shape into pretend cakes or forts. A soft argument breaks out between two boys disputing over a broken marble. One swears it is his because he found it first, the other counters that he had it yesterday. You watch them scowl and circle one another, but the argument dissolves into laughter when a third child interrupts with some joke you cannot quite hear. A philosophical tension brushes your thoughts. Social historians remain divided on whether slum childhoods were defined more by hardship or resilience. You observe the children around you, noticing how quickly their moods shift from toil to play and back again. Their lives are undeniably harsh, yet their spirits are nimble, adapting in ways adults often forget how to do. A boy passes carrying a cage made of wire and broken slats of wood. Inside the cage, a single pigeon sits calmly, its feathers puffed out. He tells a younger child, trailing behind him, to keep up. You do not hear the full story, but a flicker of recollection tells you that some slum boys trapped pigeons to sell for pennies, or in some cases, to train for races. The thought surprises you, a reminder that slum life contained its own small hobbies, its own dreaming spaces tucked between chores and hunger. The street slopes gently downward into a busier lane. Here older children cluster at corners waiting for possible employers. A butcher might need someone to run messages. A bakery might hire a few temporary hands to knead dough or sweep floors. A washerwoman might need help hauling linens. You see them scan each passerby with a mixture of hope and calculation. Their stillness feels older than their years. You pause, letting your fingers lightly graze the rough wall beside you. The texture anchors you, reminding you that you are only a visitor in this world. A pair of children starts skipping rope nearby, the thump of feet and slap of rope, forming a beat that ripples through the alleyway. Their laughter grows louder as they attempt to match each other's speed. The rope is frayed, the handles improvised, but the enthusiasm is bright enough to chase away the gloom for a moment. Your gaze drifts upward to where clotheslines stretch between windows. A small shirt flutters in the breeze, patched so many times it looks like a quilt of mismatched cotton. A tiny pair of socks hangs next to it, one sock shorter than the other. From another window, a toddler peers down at you, pressing their palms to the glass, leaving faint foggy handprints. They smile, and you smile automatically in return. As you walk onward, a group of children sweep around you in a cluster, carrying buckets between them. One child sloshes water over the rim, splattering your boots. They apologize with a mix of guilt and amusement before hurrying off toward a washhouse. The smell of soap drifts in their wake, mingling briefly with the damp, earthy scent of the slum. You take a slow breath, absorbing all the overlapping scenes, the work, the play, the running feet, the tired eyes, the quick laughter, the determination that seems stitched into every child you see. This district may be unforgiving, but these children navigate it with a strange mixture of vulnerability and brilliance. You watch them for a moment longer, letting the rhythm of their lives settle around you like a soft, restless breeze. Then you continue forward, stepping gently, so as not to disturb the fragile choreography unfolding at your feet. You follow the curve of the alley until the soundscape shifts again, softening into a quieter hum, filled with low voices and the muffled clatter of pots inside cramped rooms. The morning light spreads thinly across the street, illuminating figures who move with steady purpose. You begin to notice women everywhere, their silhouettes framed in doorways, their hands immersed in tasks that keep these fragile households functioning. The slum has its own pulse, and these women are the ones coaxing it forward, minute by minute, chore by chore. You step aside as a woman brushes past you carrying a basin of water that sloshes dangerously close to the rim. Her sleeves are rolled to the elbow, exposing forearms marked with the pale impressions of laundry soap. She glances at you briefly, her face lined with fatigue, yet undeniably strong. A well-recorded detail from Victorian social investigators rises in your mind. Reports from the era highlighted that women in the poorest districts often worked 18-hour days when combining wage labour with domestic burdens. Watching her navigate the cobblestones with practiced balance, you understand how those reports took shape. Ahead, another woman kneels on a doorstep, scrubbing a shirt so thoroughly her knuckles scrape the wood. She pauses only long enough to wring the cloth, sending droplets flying in a shimmering arc through the cold air. Her child sits beside her with a tin cup, tapping it absently against the stones. The mother murmurs something to soothe them, the softness in her voice wrapping around the chilly morning like a wool shawl. You feel your chest tighten at the gentle contrast between her tenderness and her exhaustion. You walk farther into the lane and glimpse a woman leaning from a window overhead as she shakes out a blanket. Dust spills downward like a brief gritty snowfall that sparkles in the angled sunlight. She beats the blanket with a swift rhythm, each strike thudding out a determination that feels older than her years. A lesser-known anecdote floats to the surface of your thoughts. In some parts of London's poorest quarters, women were said to use unique knock patterns on window frames to signal safety, danger, or simple greetings to one another. You wonder if this rhythmic beating is merely housekeeping or a coded message stitched into daily routine. To your right, a doorway opens, and a young woman emerges with a bundle wrapped in cloth. She unfolds it carefully to reveal small tin containers, each filled with food she likely prepared before dawn. She glances around, searching for customers among hungry labourers heading to the main road. She approaches one man with quiet confidence, showing him the food inside the tins. According to several contemporaneous accounts, you recall many slum women supplemented their income by cooking meals for single men who rented beds by the night and lacked kitchens of their own. Watching her negotiate prices with a calm that belies her nerves, you sense the intricate networks women wove to sustain their families. A deeper silence presses against one wall of the alley, drawing your attention to a woman sitting alone on a low stool. She mends a coat with small precise stitches, her needle glinting whenever it catches a fragment of light. Her fingers move quickly, almost elegantly, despite the cold. She pauses once, stretching her hand, as though fighting off a cramp. You approach slowly, noticing how the coat she repairs is far too big for her. A comment from a 19th century charity worker echoes faintly in your memory. Women in the slums often repaired garments for others in exchange for scraps of food or temporary lodging. The fact settles into you with a quiet weight as you watch her fold the coat neatly before picking up another torn garment. A little farther along, two women argue in hushed tones near a stack of crates. Their words overlap too quickly for you to understand fully, but their gestures tell half the story. One points sharply toward a small pile of coals, the other shakes her head and crosses her arms. The tension between them feels long-standing, knitted into their shared struggle. Yet their voices never rise too high. They seem to know arguments echo easily in these tight spaces, carrying farther than intended. You wonder what neighbouring ears have learned over the years. You continue walking until a sudden burst of laughter surprises you. You turn to see a cluster of women gathered around a chipped pot resting on an overturned crate. One woman ladles out a thin stew, distributing small portions to her neighbours. You notice how some bowls are nearly empty, others more generously filled. There is no formal system here, only a quiet understanding. One woman wipes her eyes, laughing at something another has said. You cannot hear the joke, but you feel its warmth radiating outward. On the far side of the square, a young woman stands outside a doorway, swinging a baby gently in her arms. She hums a soft melody that threads through the morning air, soothing even to your own ears. The baby gazes at her in calm fascination. The melody is simple, steady, and unmistakably weary. Contemporary observers once wrote that lullabies in working-class districts often carried minor tones shaped by hardship rather than cheer. Listening to her song, you feel that note of melancholy curling around its edges. A few steps beyond her, an older woman tends to a pot perched over a tiny brick fire. The flames lick upward, greedy for warmth. She stirs the pot with a spoon, carved from wood, worn smooth over the years. She glances at you with a mix of suspicion and curiosity. You recognise how fiercely privacy is guarded in this neighbourhood, even when everything is shared. Scholars of urban life still wrestle with the question of how much agency women in these districts truly possessed, given the constant weight of economic survival. As you observe her sharpen her gaze, you sense a level of autonomy forged not from freedom, but from necessity. You continue on and notice how each doorstep hosts its own unseen battle. A woman washes linens, her arms moving with a steady rhythm. Another chops onions, nose wrinkling from the sting. A third sweeps her threshold with a broom frayed nearly to nothing, determined to keep her small patch of cobblestone as presentable as possible. Every gesture feels purposeful, grounded, resilient. A sense of quiet admiration settles over you as you walk. The women of the slum operate like the district's invisible thread, holding together lives that would otherwise fray. Their presence softens the harshness of the environment, even as their workloads intensify it. You sense the weight they carry, but you also see their strength reflected in the way they move, speak, and even rest. There is no grandeur in their actions, but there is undeniable dignity. As you come to the end of the alley, the air shifts again. You hear a faint tapping upstairs, perhaps someone preparing a morning task or signalling something to a neighbour. The energy of the slum pivots slightly, hinting that more stories lie just ahead. You take one last look at the women behind you, their figures framed by rising steam and pale sunlight. Then you take a careful step forward, letting their world fade gently as the next corner calls to you. You move along a narrow turning that slopes upward just enough for your calves to notice, and soon the street folds itself into a series of stairwells, clinging to the sides of tall, exhausted buildings. Each staircase looks as if it has survived too many winters, bowed and chipped from generations of feet, climbing them before dawn and long after dusk. You place a hand on the wobbling railing and begin to climb, sensing the temperature rise subtly with every step. The air becomes thicker, warmer, and filled with the faint scent of steam and damp cloth. This is where the garret rooms and sweatshops hide, tucked beneath crooked roofs and behind doors barely wider than your shoulders. You reach the landing and hear the unmistakable rhythm of needles piercing fabric. The sound pulses through the wood beneath your boots, like a heartbeat trapped inside the building. You move toward it, your breath steadying as the warmth envelops you. Historical reports from that era often described slum garrets as makeshift workshops where dozens of seamstresses stitched collars, cuffs and trousers for pennies, each piece timed to the last second. You feel the gravity of that image as you approach a half-open door glowing with lamplight. You push gently, and the door creaks as though complaining. Inside, the small attic room swells with heat. A group of women and a few men sit shoulder to shoulder at long tables, each hunched over fabric, stretched between their fingers. Their faces shine faintly with perspiration, despite the morning's chill outside. Iron stoves roar in the corner, heating irons resting on top, like silent guardians waiting to be lifted. The smell of singed cotton lingers in the air. One woman looks up at you with brief curiosity before returning to her work. Her fingers move so quickly that you lose track of them, thread looping in and out of the cloth like a small relentless creature. She barely blinks. You notice her lips moving as she counts stitches under her breath. A detail preserved in wage books from the time tells you why workers were often paid by the piece, not the hour, forcing them to sew at frantic speed if they hoped to afford even the cheapest lodging. Watching her, you feel a quiet ache that settles into your ribs. The room pulses with concentration. A young man sits near the stove pressing collars with swift, jerking motions. Each press hisses sharply as steam rises from the iron. His shirt clings to his back, and you see him wipe sweat from his brow with the back of his wrist. Tucked near his station, a small tin holds crusts of bread, likely his breakfast and lunch combined. You sense how every minute stolen for eating chips away at wages he can barely spare. A small gasp catches your attention. In one corner, a girl no older than 12 pricks her finger. She shakes her hand quickly and dabs the wound on her apron, leaving a tiny red dot that blends into the constellation of older stains. She looks at you shyly before rushing back to her stitches. An odd fragment from workers' pamphlets crosses your thoughts. Some foremen were rumoured to favour children for delicate seam work, believing their hands to be more nimble than adult fingers. You watch her sew with an intensity no child should need, her shoulders curled inward, like a sparrow defending its feathers. A woman seated beneath the lowest part of the sloped ceiling hums quietly to herself as she works. Her melody floats like a small comfort through the heat, softening the room's sharp edges. Several workers glance her way, their expressions momentarily relaxing. In cramped garrets like this, small songs were often unofficial signals of morale, helping people endure endless hours without once standing to stretch. You can almost feel the tune settle around your shoulders, like a thin, warm shawl. You shift your weight as a board creaks loudly beneath you. The workers hardly react. They are used to noises, to the unpredictable groans of their aging workspace. Stories passed down from older residents claimed some attic floors sagged so deeply that sewing tables had to be propped up on bricks to stop needles rolling off. As you glance around, you notice exactly that in one corner. The bricks are stacked unevenly, but hold strong. A woman at the far table pauses her sewing just long enough to blow on her fingertips, cooling the skin, reddened by repetitive motion. She exchanges a few words with another sewer, a conversation too soft for you to catch fully. Their voices melt into the warm air. Scholars of labour history continue to dispute whether such sweatshops offered more autonomy than factory floors, or merely a different flavour of exploitation. Both women return to work with motions so synchronised they could be musicians in the same ensemble. Perhaps that itself is your answer. You step farther inside, careful not to disturb stacks of finished garments piled precariously near the doorway. A man passes by, carrying a bundle of trousers so tall he can barely see over it. You flatten against the wall to let him through. He mutters thanks without looking up. His boots thud purposefully as he descends the stairs, delivering the finished pieces to a middleman waiting on the street below. Payment will likely be delayed. It often was. The room continues its steady rhythm of needle scissors and irons. A gust of cold air slips through a cracked window, momentarily refreshing. You move toward the window and peer outside. The rooftops stretch in uneven rows, each one patched with tar, scrap wood and cloth to keep rain from seeping inside. Water droplets cling to the glass, catching sunlight like tiny gems. You imagine how beautiful these rooftops must look from the sky, though from inside they mostly represent leaks waiting to happen. A cough erupts behind you, deep and rasping. An older woman sits hunched over her work, her breath strained. She clutches her chest briefly, then presses on, determined to finish her stack of shirts. Contemporaneous health reports describe cases of seamstress lung caused by lint-filled air in these rooms. You can feel the heaviness in your own throat, as though the air has thickened with every minute spent here. You turn back to the workers, their silhouettes etched against the glow of the lamps. Every movement they make is measured, precise, almost hypnotic. Yet beneath the calm routine, you sense a constant tension, a quiet race against hunger, rent and time itself. This room is at once a sanctuary and a cage. It provides income, yet demands every ounce of energy in return. A low whistle signals a small break. Several workers stretch through they never fully stand. Their joints crack softly. Someone passes around a tin of weak tea, and each person takes a sip before handing it to the next. The tea smells faintly of metal, but the warmth makes their shoulders soften for a fleeting moment. A hush settles over, the garret tender and temporary. You step out quietly, letting the door close behind you with a soft thud. The relative coolness of the stairwell washes over your skin like a balm. You exhale slowly, grounding yourself, as you descend toward the street again. The sweatshop's warmth clings to your clothing, lingering as a reminder of all the lives stitched into the city's garments. The slum unfolds ahead of you once more, welcoming you back into its restless, breathing maze. You follow the slope of the roofline until the street opens into a cramped courtyard, tucked so tightly between leaning buildings that sunlight barely slips inside. You step forward slowly, letting your eyes adjust to the softer, muted glow. The air here feels different from the busy alleys behind you. It carries a hush, a pause, as though the courtyard is holding its breath. You can hear faint murmurs drifting from doorways, the clink of a pot being set on a stone step, and the faint rustle of laundry swaying overhead. You sense that this hidden space has stories folded into its corners, secrets tucked beneath cracked plaster and sagging window frames. You walk farther in and notice how the courtyard seems to serve many purposes at once. A woman kneels near a bucket, scrubbing a set of wooden spoons with brisk circular motions. A man stands near a doorway, patching a section of wall with bits of plaster he mixes in a chipped bowl. Two children chase each other around a stack of crates, their laughter bouncing softly between the buildings. Despite the poverty pressing in from every angle, this little enclave feels oddly alive, as if it carries a spirit that refuses to be dimmed. A trace of information drawn from municipal surveys of the era surfaces as you look around London's hidden courtyards, often housed clustered communities who shared resources, news and burdens in ways outsiders rarely witnessed. Walking among them now, you understand how these spaces might have offered a fragile sense of belonging that the wider city denied. You hear a neighbour call to another across the yard, exchanging a joke that makes both chuckle before returning to their tasks. You notice a small passage branching off to your left, barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through. The bricks close in so tightly that the path feels more like a secret corridor than an alley. Some locals used to whisper that these shortcuts were perfect for avoiding trouble or slipping past rowdy drinkers at night. You imagine how many hurried footsteps once brushed against these walls, and how many confidences may have been whispered just beyond their reach. Your attention drifts back to the courtyard itself. A man sits beneath a window, mending a fishing net that has clearly never seen the sea. The net is repurposed, patched and repatched until it resembles a lacework of improvisation. He works quietly, humming a faint tune that seems older than the buildings around him. An odd fragment of oral history creeps into your thoughts. Some slum residents repurposed old nets like this to hang laundry store potatoes or even partition-shared rooms. Watching him weave new strength into tired rope, you sense the quiet ingenuity born from scarcity. A thin wisp of smoke curls from a makeshift chimney pipe sticking out of one wall. It drifts upward, and dissolves into the pale sky. Someone inside must be boiling water or cooking a simple meal. The scent is faint but comforting, a mix of warm grain and something slightly sweet. You picture a family gathered in a room barely larger than a cupboard, grateful for a bowl of porridge made from whatever they could afford. Your breath softens as you imagine the warmth of that small space. A wooden door creaks open nearby, and an elderly woman steps into the courtyard with a broom in hand. She sweeps the stones with slow, deliberate strokes, lifting dust that glitters in the thin stripe of sunlight. Her motions are steady and purposeful, as though she has performed this small ritual every morning for decades. Observers from the past sometimes noted that older women often became informal caretakers of shared spaces, smoothing disputes and maintaining a fragile order. Watching her, you sense she might be one of them, someone whose presence quietly steadies the courtyard. She pauses to greet a neighbour carrying a pail of water. Their conversation drifts towards you in soft fragments about rent illness and the price of coal. Their voices remain calm, but you can feel tension woven beneath the surface. Researchers have long disagreed on whether these fragile bonds of cooperation made slum life more bearable or simply concealed deeper fractures. You listen to their exchange, sensing how complex and delicate these relationships must have been. A young man arrives with a small dog trotting behind him. The dog barks once, then circles the courtyard, sniffing at crates and corners as if conducting an inspection of its territory. The young man calls softly, and the dog trots back to him obediently. You smile, surprised by the tiny spark of joy the animal brings. A lesser-known story from slum writings mentions that stray dogs sometimes attach themselves to particular courtyards, becoming unofficial mascots or protectors. Looking at this dog's confident gait, you imagine it has earned that status here. A soft thump draws your eyes upward. Against one window, a woman taps on the sill to signal to someone across the courtyard. Another woman appears in a facing window, responding with her own subtle gesture. No words pass between them, but you can tell the exchange conveys something familiar, practical, perhaps even comforting. Human communication thrives in small spaces, blooming between windows and doorways, like vines reaching towards sunlight. You walk along the edge of the courtyard, fingers trailing lightly over the pitted wall beside you. A few flakes of plaster cling to your fingertips. The wall is damp and cold, but there's a strange reassurance in the texture grounding you in this moment. A few feet ahead, a bucket catches water dripping from a broken gutter, each drop landing with a rhythmic plink that echoes faintly. The sound is almost musical in the stillness. A woman emerges from a basement room carrying a stack of soot-marked bowls. She places them on the step and wipes her forehead with her sleeve. She glances up at the sky, perhaps checking how much daylight remains before she must leave for work. The bowls clatter as she adjusts them, and she mutters something under her breath about being late again. You sense her worry in the way she moves quickly, as though time presses heavily against her shoulders. Another cluster of children gathers by a pile of crates, building a tiny fort from bits of discarded wood. One child arranges the pieces with solemn focus, while the others cheer him on. Their creation is crooked, fragile, and beautiful in its own way. You feel your lips curve into a small smile at their inventiveness. In this pocket of the slum imagination still has room to grow. You stand quietly for a moment, letting the courtyard breathe around you. It is not grand, nor clean, nor peaceful in the traditional sense, yet something here pulses with resilience. The walls may be cracked, the windows patch the air heavy, but the sense of shared life is undeniable. This small oasis of humanity holds its own fragile dignity. You take a final step through a narrow gap between houses, leaving the courtyard behind you. As you emerge into the next alley, you carry with you the echo of hushed conversations, the steady scrape of a broom, and the warm weight of a world that persists even in the tightest, quietest corners. You follow the alley until it narrows once more, then gradually widens into a longer, dim corridor, lined with doors that seem to lean toward each other, like old friends sharing secrets. The air shifts again, gaining a stale heaviness, that wraps itself around your shoulders. A faint murmur rises from inside the buildings, coughs, snores, whispers, the soft vibration of too many bodies sharing too little space. You step beneath a sagging doorway marked by scratches, soot, and finger smudges. Here the cheap lodging houses wait for anyone who can spare a coin or two. You inhale slowly, preparing yourself for the cramped world hiding inside. You reach a door that stands half open, pushed by the draft rather than intention. Inside the room reveals itself in a single overwhelming glance. Wooden benches line the walls, each one crowded with people, hunched forward, their elbows resting on their knees. Some doze, some mumble, some simply stare into the grain of the wood, with eyes that have forgotten how to rest. A well-known observation, recorded by city inspectors, drifts into your thoughts. Lodging houses in the worst-off districts were so overcrowded that sleeping upright on benches or leaning across tables became cheaper options than proper beds. The truth of that statement breathes through the stale air around you. A man near the door lifts his head just long enough to acknowledge your presence. His eyes are ringed with fatigue, the kind that sinks deep into bone. You nod back gently, stepping quietly so as not to disturb those dozing without comfort. The room smells of damp fabric, unwashed wool, faint tobacco, and the sour breath of too many bodies exhaling in one confined space. It is not unbearable, just heavy like a blanket soaked through and laid across your lungs. You notice a cluster of men huddled around a small table in the centre. One of them has tied a rope from one post to another, and the others take turns leaning their chests against it, resting as though the rope supports them more faithfully than the city ever has. A curious detail you once heard from accounts of slum life nudges into your memory ropes. Like these were sometimes used as a makeshift half-sleep arrangement, cheaper than renting a chair or bench. The men paid a penny or so to slump over the rope, for a night suspended between exhaustion and rest. Watching them now, the concept feels both tragic and strangely resourceful. You move deeper into the lodging house, navigating around shoes, crates and blankets, tossed across the floor. A woman sits in a corner with her back to the wall, her arms wrapped around her knees. Her skirt is patched so many times it resembles a mosaic of borrowed fabrics. She watches the room with careful eyes, alert even while sitting still. You sense she may have slept here many nights and knows exactly where to position herself to avoid trouble. The flicker of lamplight softens her features, casting gentle shadows across her cheekbones. A faint shuffle behind you draws your attention to a staircase leading upward. The steps creak with each footfall as you ascend into a cramped landing, lined with doors barely large enough to swing open properly. You place your hand on the railing, feeling the gritty surface beneath your fingertips. The air grows warmer with each step, and you catch a whiff of stale smoke drifting from somewhere above. You reach the top and step into a long corridor where people sleep in rows, shoulder to shoulder, on straw mattresses, thinned to nearly nothing. Someone mutters in their sleep, kicking lightly at the air. Another turns over and pulls a frayed blanket up to their chin. The ceiling slopes sharply to one side, making the room feel like a giant lung squeezed too tightly inside the building's chest. A young man lies near the wall, with his boots still on, as though he had no energy left to remove them. You hear a soft whistle of air escape his lips as he dreams. You pause to steady your breath, trying not to disturb anyone. A woman near the window shifts and opens one eye before closing it again. She clutches a small cloth pouch to her chest, likely containing her day's wages or the little food she has left. You notice how tenderly she guards it, even in sleep. Different writers from that era described how theft in lodging houses was common, not due to malice alone, but because desperation left almost no room for ethics. Yet looking at her now, you feel the vulnerability more than the threat. You move toward a small wooden beam fixed across a portion of the room. A man has draped himself over it, stomach first, arms hanging on either side, snoring lightly. Another man waits beside him, clearly eager to take his place, once the current occupant slips off. The arrangement looks painful, but the man resting seems oddly comfortable. A small, seldom mentioned anecdote surfaces in your mind. Some lodging houses had literal leaning bars, where people paid a bit to rest upright, or bent forward so long as they did not claim too much space. You study the scene and realize how sleep becomes a negotiation here, an agreement between exhaustion and opportunity. A soft cough echoes from the far end of the corridor. You walk toward it slowly. An older man sits upright, wrapped in a blanket that barely covers his legs. He nods politely as you approach, his eyes alert despite the fatigue etched across his face. He taps the blanket lightly and says something you cannot quite hear, then gestures to the others sleeping nearby. His expression holds neither bitterness nor scorn, just a quiet resignation that seems to flow through the lodging house, like a shared understanding. You take a seat on an empty crate for a moment, allowing the room's atmosphere to settle around you. The whispers, snores, and creaking boards merge into a soft, low hum that feels strangely soothing despite the crowding. You rest your elbows on your knees and observe the people around you, noticing how many different kinds of exhaustion exist in this single space. A question drifts through your thoughts, one that continues to trouble social historians. Interpretations vary widely on whether these lodging houses offered safety compared to sleeping outdoors, or merely disguised hardship in a fragile shell of shelter. Sitting here, you sense how the answer might depend entirely on who is asked. A man shifts beside you, mumbling in his sleep. His coat slips from his shoulders, revealing a shirt worn thin around the seams. You gently lift the coat and drape it back over him. The moment feels like a small offering to the humanity compressed into this narrow room. You rise and step carefully over blankets and boots, heading for a window, cracked open, just enough to let in a thin ribbon of fresh air. You press your fingertips to the sill, feeling the coolness of the night's lingering damp. Outside, the slum buzzes faintly, but in here everything feels suspended, paused, wrapped in a strange intimacy. You sense that this lodging house, cramped as it is, functions like a reluctant sanctuary for those who cling to each day with stubborn persistence. You turn away from the window and make your way toward the stairs descending quietly back to the ground floor. The air cools with each step, loosening the weight pressing against your chest. You step outside, and the breeze greets you with a gentle touch carrying the scent of damp stone and distant cooking fires. The lodging house door closes behind you with a soft thud. You exhale deeply, grounding yourself as you continue your quiet walk through London's hidden heart, guided by the dim glow of morning filtering into the alleys ahead. You move along the dim street until the smell shifts once more, turning sharp and herbal, then tangy, then oddly sweet. You recognize the scent even before you see the source. This is where the slum's healers gather, the unofficial medics of the alleyways, the bone-setters, herb mixers, street surgeons and quacks whose skills range from life-saving ingenuity to hazardous guesswork. You step into a widening stretch of road where makeshift stalls lean against walls, their tables cluttered with jars, cloth bundles, powders, and mysterious liquids that glimmer or cloud in the muted light. Before you reach the first stall, you pause. A man sits cross-legged on a mat, gently binding a neighbour's wrist with strips of cloth. His movements are steady and patient. As you watch him tighten the cloth, a detail drawn from widely circulated charity reports slips into your mind. Slum districts often depended more on informal healers than trained physicians, simply because professional medical care was too expensive for most residents. Seeing the man secure the bandage with quiet confidence, you understand why his neighbours trust him. A little farther, on a wooden crate, serves as a counter for an elderly woman whose table overflows with herbs hanging in bundles like inverted bouquets. She grinds dried leaves with a stone pestle, the rhythmic grinding forming a gentle counterpoint to the morning bustle. Her stall smells of mint juniper and something slightly citrus. A curious sliver of folklore surfaces. As you observe her repertoire, some healers in cramped London alleys were said to specialise in street tonics brewed from plants grown secretly in hidden roof gardens. Looking at her stained fingers and carefully packed bundles, you suspect she might be one of the few who cultivated remedies above the city rather than below it. You move closer, watching her pour a crushed mixture into a small paper packet. She folds it with delicate precision and hands it to a customer who presses a few coins into her palm. The exchange is quiet, personal, almost ceremonial. These healers cannot promise cures, but they offer rituals of care that carry their own comfort. Next to her stall stands a man with a suitcase propped open, like a theatrical prop. Inside, glass bottles sparkle in the dim light, filled with liquids in shades of amber green and murky brown. He raises one bottle and shakes it dramatically, claiming it relieves aches, fevers, insomnia, heartbreak, and possibly financial misfortune. His voice rises with each claim, drawing a small crowd. A handful of people chuckle or scoff while others examine the bottles with genuine interest. Observers who documented life here often described these flamboyant sellers as part entertainer, part merchant, part confessor. You watch him pour a few drops onto his tongue, then declare himself invigorated. His performance earns applause from a group of children. You wander past him, stepping around a crate used as a stool. A young woman seated there opens a small leather pouch to reveal an array of needles, thread, and tiny tools. You watch her stitch the edge of a man's torn ear with a focus more suited to a surgeon than a seamstress. The procedure is quick, efficient, and surprisingly calm. A short, unexpected note from older oral accounts flickers across your thoughts. Some of the best stitchers in the slums were garment workers who moonlighted as wound closers, their sewing skills repurposed from cloth to skin when neighbours needed help. Watching her precise motions, you marvel at the adaptability of necessity. A soft grumble draws your attention to a man sitting beneath a doorway, sharpening a set of small metal tools on a stone. His face is lined with concentration. Beside him rests a stack of wooden splints, neatly carved from discarded furniture pieces. A mother approaches, carrying a boy who cradles his injured hand. The man gestures for her to sit, and within moments, he examines the boy's fingers with gentle pressure. He nods, selects a splint, and begins binding it in place. A question continues to fuel debate among modern researchers, whether these unlicensed practitioners offered safer care than the overwhelmed hospitals of the era, or whether they inadvertently worsened many injuries. Watching him now, you feel both truths hover in the air like twin shadows. You ease to the edge of the alley to watch a crowd gather around a woman who has set out a large bowl filled with water-tinted red by some unknown ingredient. She dips strips of cloth into the mixture, letting them soak before wringing them out with a strength that surprises you. She claims the soaked cloth eases inflammation and soothes bruises. A few customers step forward, lifting sleeves or skirts to show her their injuries. She applies the cloth with careful pressure, murmuring instructions in a hushed tone. You notice she keeps a separate cloth over her shoulder, likely for wiping her own hands. Her efficiency feels practiced, seasoned. Behind her, tucked against a wall, sits an elderly man, hunched over a small tin filled with greyish powder. He stirs it thoughtfully with the end of a spoon. When a passerby coughs, he calls out an offer of a remedy ground from 3 minerals and the breath of the earth. You raise your eyebrows slightly at the description. A tiny anecdote from street interviews of the time resurfaces. Some quacks developed elaborate poetic names for mundane powders, hoping the flourish alone would earn a few pennies. Hearing his theatrical phrasing, you suspect he belongs to that tradition. You continue walking, your steps slowing as the services become more varied. A woman leans over a makeshift basin, washing the infected leg of an older neighbour. Her motions are careful, even tender. You can see the steam rising from the water, swirling in delicate tendrils. She murmurs reassurances, adjusting the cloth gently whenever the older woman winces. Their shared silence feels heavy with trust. You sense that this kind of care exists beyond commerce, rooted instead in fragile community bonds that grow stronger precisely because so little else offers safety. Nearby, 2 men argue quietly over the effectiveness of a tonic. Their debate drifts toward you. One claims the drink helped him sleep for the first time in days, while the other complains it made his stomach twist for hours. Their voices rise and fall with an almost musical rhythm. Their disagreement mirrors a larger unresolved question among social historians: how much of slum medicine actually improved health, and how much simply offered comfort in a world that provided little else. Listening to the men, you can almost feel the balance between hope and skepticism tip back and forth. A pair of children slip past you, giggling as they clutch a small jar of something pink and sticky. The seller nearby claims it cures toothaches if rubbed on the gums. The children seem far more enchanted by its bright colour than its purpose. Their laughter warms the air around you momentarily. You stop near the end of the row, watching a young healer with ink-stained hands sketching symbols onto paper. She folds the pages into small packets and hands them to customers who ask for protection charms rather than remedies. Her stall feels quieter, more mystical. Her eyes carry a softness that contrasts the harsher world outside the alley. Some people take the charms gratefully, tucking them into their coats or slipping them into their shoes. You sense that belief itself is a form of medicine here. The alley narrows again, the stalls fading behind you. The scents of herbs, smoke, and unfamiliar brews linger in your clothes as you step back into the main passage. The voices of healers echo faintly, blending with the restless pulse of the slum. You exhale slowly, feeling those echoes settle into your own rhythm as you move toward whatever waits beyond the next uncertain turn. You follow the twisting lane until the air thickens with a different kind of tension, a subtle current beneath the morning bustle that makes your steps instinctively quieter. The slum changes mood here. The chatter softens, the glances grow sharper, and an undercurrent of guarded awareness pulses between every doorway. You sense immediately that this part of the district lives on the thin edge between necessity and risk. Petty crime, small swindles, hastily formed schemes, and desperate gambles weave themselves into daily life like extra threads in the city's fraying fabric. You step into a narrow alley where shadows fall in uneven stripes. A young man leans against a wall, wiping mud from his shoes with exaggerated nonchalance. He pretends not to see you, though his eyes flick toward your pockets with the swift, practiced motion of someone who has made a habit of scanning strangers. A detail preserved in various magistrate reports comes to mind as you observe him. Petty theft in Victorian slums often operated less as rebellion and more as survival, pushed forward by days when wages fell short or employers withheld payment. Watching him adjust his stance, you feel the weight of that truth hanging between you. A few steps ahead, two men stand with their backs to the alley, huddled over a crate covered with cloth. Their whispers rise and fall in clipped tones. One lifts the cloth's corner, just enough to reveal something metallic gleaming faintly beneath it. The moment is fleeting, but the tension is unmistakable. You continue on without pausing, sensing that whatever lies beneath the cloth is not meant for curious eyes. As you pass, one man clears his throat sharply. It is not a warning exactly, but it tells you they know you are there. Across the lane, a boy no older than 10 crouches beside a stack of broken crates, arranging bits of wire and scrap metal into a small pouch. His movements are quick, furtive. When he notices you, he flashes a grin that contains more bravado than innocence. From scattered writings of those who lived here, you recall that children often acted as lookouts or errand runners for older thieves carrying messages through the maze-like alleys too quickly for police to track. The boy darts away before you can respond, swallowed by the tangle of side passages. A man in a threadbare coat steps out from behind a doorway and approaches you with a small wooden box in hand. He opens it to reveal cheap trinkets, polished stones, and a silver spoon engraved with initials. You doubt he can explain honestly. He speaks softly, offering you the items at a suspiciously low price. A peculiar remark from older residents resurfaces in your thoughts. Stolen household goods often changed hands so many times that even thieves struggle to remember where they came from. You politely decline, and the man shrugs, closing the box with a snap before slipping back into the shadows. Further ahead, the alley widens into a tiny open square where a few men lean over a crate, shaking dice in their hands. Their laughter spills into the air in bursts rough but genuine. Coins clink on the stone surface as bets change hands. One man pumps his fist in triumph, while another groans, clutching his head dramatically. These small games, though illegal, provided momentary sparks of excitement in lives otherwise constricted by exhaustion. From several memoirs of the era, you remember that slum gambling rarely involved large sums. More often it risked a few pennies or pieces of bread, or even favours owed. You sense how much those stakes mattered. A sudden scuffle erupts near the corner. Two women stand toe to toe, arguing over a missing loaf of bread. Their voices rise sharply, their gestures quick and urgent. One woman clutches her apron protectively, while the other jabs a finger toward a nearby doorway. Their dispute vibrates through the courtyard, like the snapping of a thread pulled too tight. A neighbour intervenes, speaking calmly, placing hands on both their shoulders until the tension eases. The loaf remains missing, but the confrontation dissolves into uneasy silence. You exhale slowly, aware of how thin the boundary is between conflict and desperation. A presence moves quietly beside you. An older man rests against a post, smoking a pipe, with a distant look in his eyes. He murmurs under his breath, as though narrating the alley to himself. He mentions police rounds in a hushed tone, then gestures faintly toward a back lane where uniformed officers occasionally pass. His words stir a lingering question that researchers still debate whether policing in the slums offered protection or primarily served as surveillance on the very people who needed help. Listening to the man's weary mutter, you feel the complexity settle on your skin like mist. You continue your walk until you come upon a woman selling ribbons from a basket. She smiles, but her eyes flick rapidly toward the street behind you. When you glance over your shoulder, you see a teenage girl lingering with her hands clasped suspiciously behind her back. The seller tenses, gripping the basket's handle. Only when the girl slips away does she relax. You sense how merchants here live in a constant choreography of suspicion and hope, trusting their neighbours just enough to function while guarding their goods closely. A faint metallic clatter draws your attention to a wall where a man adjusts the hinges on a wooden shutter. He works calmly, but keeps one foot braced against the door, as if expecting it to push open suddenly. When you look closer, you see a wedge of metal jammed into the frame, meant to keep intruders from lifting the lock. A small detail from police journals floats into your mind. Burglary prevention in the slums relied more on makeshift reinforcements than on formal security. You admire the ingenuity while feeling the vulnerability that inspired it. You walk on, feeling the alley tighten once more around you. Ahead, a woman in a long coat stands beneath a dim window, speaking softly to someone hidden behind the curtain. She passes a parcel through a gap in the sill, receiving coins in return. The exchange is silent, almost gentle. You have no idea what is inside the parcel, and you do not try to guess. Whatever it contains, it keeps someone fed, someone warm, someone afloat, in a world that demands constant negotiation. As you continue, you notice a few people deliberately avoid your gaze. Others watch you openly, measuring your pace, your direction, your intentions. The atmosphere is not hostile, just alert. This district lives by attention. Every passerby is a potential opportunity, or threat, or witness. You tread lightly, letting your steps match the rhythm of the alley, silent and respectful. You reach the far end of the lane, where the street widens slightly, revealing a path washed in pale light. The tension loosens, exhaling the moment you step out of the shadows. Behind you, the maze swallows every whisper, every scheme, every hurried exchange, returning to its quiet cycle of improvisation and survival. You breathe deeply, feeling the slum's heartbeat shift again, as you continue onward into whatever world waits just beyond the next corner. You follow the faint rise of voices drifting from a wider street, the sounds carrying a livelier pulse than the tense alleys you've just left behind. As you turn the corner, a warm glow spills from open doorways and fogged windows, painting the cobblestones with flickers of amber. You feel the air change instantly. It grows thicker, warmer, tinged with yeast smoke, and something sweetly sharp. This is the stretch of the slum ruled by public houses and gin shops, places where exhaustion melts briefly into relief, where people gather not because they expect joy, but because they need a place to set their burdens down. You drift forward, letting the sounds pull you in with slow coaxing fingers. The first doorway you pass opens onto a tavern whose interior glows like a small ember in the gloom. People crowd around wooden tables scarred from generations of elbows, mugs, and spilled stories. A woman leans behind the counter, wiping tankards with a cloth that no longer remembers white. Her movements are brisk, reliable, and practiced. From the descriptions written in official temperance pamphlets of the era, these working-class drinking rooms were often described as the social engines of the poorest districts, offering warmth, light, and a sense of belonging that the streets rarely provided. Standing here, you feel that warmth hum in the air, like a second heartbeat. A man near the entrance raises his mug toward you in a half-hearted salute. His eyes shine with fatigue, softened by drink. You return a small nod before continuing on, careful not to disturb those huddled together in tired conversation. The scent of ale mingles with cooking fat and damp wool. Even the floor, sticky from spilled drink, feels somehow welcoming. Two women share a plate of potatoes at a corner table, one talking animatedly with hands that dance through the air, the other laughing softly into her sleeve. Their laughter is not carefree, but it carries a genuine moment of ease, something rare enough to feel precious. Further inside, you catch sight of a man tuning a battered fiddle. He plucks the strings gently until the instrument releases a thin, wavering note that wobbles like a candle flame in wind. A handful of customers turn their heads, listening for what might come next. He begins to play a simple tune, rough around the edges but heartfelt. The melody threads through the tavern, like a fragile ribbon looping between conversations and settling into the wooden beams above. A small, nearly forgotten detail from neighbourhood lore flickers across your thoughts. Fiddlers in poorer districts often earned free drinks rather than money, trading music for warmth and a place to rest. Watching him now, that exchange feels entirely believable. You continue back outside and cross the street toward a low-lit gin shop tucked between two leaning buildings. The doorway is narrow and the smell that wafts out is nearly overwhelming. Juniper sugar, burnt oak, and the faint chemical bite of cheap distillation. Inside, men and women cluster around a counter where cloudy glasses sit in uneven rows. A woman behind the counter pours gin with quick movements, her sleeves rolled up, her expression unreadably tired. The sharp clink of glass on wood echoes like a small metronome. The room buzzes with overlapping murmurs. One man recounts the frustrations of his day to anyone who will listen. Another stares into his drink as though waiting for it to reveal an answer. You spot a young mother sipping slowly while her child sleeps in her lap, her hand resting protectively across the child's back. Near the far wall, two workers discuss wages in hushed tones that rise and fall like a restless tide. You sense how alcohol here is less indulgence and more refuge, a way to dull the sharp corners of survival before the next dawn arrives. At the edge of the room, a woman unwraps a loaf of stale bread, offering small pieces to a couple of friends. They break it with quiet gratitude. These moments of shared food feel almost ceremonial. Conversations drift between laughter and sighs. In these cramped quarters, even the silences seem to say something. You step back outside, letting the door close gently behind you. A few feet away, a man leans against a wall, humming a low tune that blends with the faint rumble of voices behind him. His breath makes small clouds in the air. He glances at you, once not suspiciously, but with the lingering softness of someone who has been warmed by the comfort of company. He flicks ash from his cigarette and mutters a few words about the rising price of drink. His tone sits somewhere between complaint and acceptance. The night absorbs his comment like an old friend. Walking farther down the street, you pass another gin house, where a pair of teenagers sweep broken glass into a pile. Their hands move quickly, rhythmically, accustomed to the task. A man stands nearby, with a cloth pressed to his cheek, complaining loudly about someone bumping into him. You hear a woman reassure him that it was not intentional. Their voices bounce lightly around the entrance, carrying a blend of annoyance and camaraderie. In the midst of this noise and bustle, your thoughts drift toward a recurring question. In urban studies, different scholars have never reached full agreement on whether establishments like these provided relief from hardship or trapped residents in cycles of addiction and poverty. Listening to the mixed sounds of laughter, sighs, arguments, and clinking glasses, you suspect the answer is complicated, weighted differently for every person who steps through these doors. A group of men spill out from a tavern behind you, one draping an arm around another's shoulders as they sing a slurred chorus of a song you do not recognize. Their voices wobble but remain cheerful. A woman follows them out, shooing them down the street with amused exasperation. The night swallows their song as they disappear into a side alley. You pause beneath the sign of a public house marked by peeling paint. The lantern above the door flickers, casting an uneven glow that dances across the stone. You feel the warmth, the noise, the fragility of relief that these establishments offer. In this harsh district, the public houses are more than drinking spots. They are brief reprieves, places where people remember what it feels like to sit, breathe, and exist alongside others without imminent fear. You stand for a moment, letting the atmosphere cradle you. Then you step forward again, feeling the street's glow fall behind you as you follow the path toward the darker edges of the slum, where the night holds different stories, waiting in its quiet pockets. You leave the warm haze of the public houses behind, and the street begins to narrow again, until the laughter and clinking mugs fade into something colder, more restrained. The slum seems to hold its breath as you enter a quieter stretch, lined with brick walls that rise like stern guardians on either side. The fog gathers more thickly here, settling low along the ground, curling around doorsteps, the way a cat circles the ankles of someone it trusts only halfway. You feel the atmosphere tighten, guiding you toward a looming presence that casts a longer shadow than any gin shop ever could the workhouse. Your footsteps grow softer as you approach a long, blocky building whose windows sit high, too narrow to offer any real view of the world outside. The walls are plain, almost severe, as if emotion has been scrubbed from the bricks. The air around it feels different, heavier, as though the building absorbs sound rather than reflecting it. From the most formal city records of the era, descriptions of workhouses often highlighted their rigid structure, designed intentionally to discourage all but the desperately poor from seeking refuge. Standing here now, you sense that discouragement in every silent corner. A thin line of people waits under the awning, their bodies wrapped in shawls or threadbare coats. Their postures are slumped arms crossed tightly over their chests, not only for warmth but for comfort. No one speaks. The quiet stretches long enough that even the distant hum of the slum seems reluctant to intrude. You watch a woman tighten her grip on a child's hand, her jaw clenched hard enough to reveal the fear she hides from the child clinging to her side. She glances up at the building, eyes flicking across its stern facade. In that brief moment, you feel the weight pressing down on her, the knowledge that entering means surrendering freedom, privacy, and dignity in exchange for food and shelter. A detail preserved in official poor law manuals drifts into your thoughts. Families admitted to workhouses were routinely separated, each member assigned to different wards with limited visits. You imagine what that knowledge must do the hearts of those waiting at the door. You walk slowly along the side of the building, listening. A faint clatter echoes from within, perhaps metal trays being stacked or shoes scraping against stone floors. The building seems to breathe in a low mechanical rhythm, steady and impersonal. You sense the lives inside arranged with similar rigidity, shaped by rules rather than comfort. A man shuffles past you with a bundle of firewood, slung over his shoulder. His coat hangs open, missing buttons, and his boots almost come apart at the toe. He stops near the workhouse gate, exhales sharply, and then moves on with a bitter mutter that dissolves into the fog. From scattered personal letters written by former inmates, some people entered these institutions, repeatedly caught in a cycle of hunger, labour, and brief escape before hardship dragged them back. Watching the man fade into the alley, you suspect he knows that cycle intimately. You continue around the corner until you reach a small window where a faint glow flickers. Through the grime-coated glass you glimpse figures, sitting at long tables, shoulders hunched spoons, lifting thin broth to their lips. Their faces blur behind the glass and fog, but their weariness is unmistakable. A whisper from slum folklore nudges into your thoughts. Some locals used to say that the workhouse stole colour from people, leaving them grey inside and out. Looking at the blurred silhouettes, you understand how such a belief took root. A soft rustle at your side startles you. A girl stands silently near the wall, her eyes wide and watchful. She cradles a chipped mug with both hands, steam curling upward from the liquid inside. Her breath forms small clouds that merge with the fog. She does not speak, but you sense that she is waiting for someone, perhaps a parent, performing chores within, or a sibling collecting rations for the day. She moves only when she hears footsteps approaching from behind. A woman emerges from the shadows, takes the girl's hand, and together they disappear down a narrow side passage. Farther down, you notice a small wooden bench placed beneath an overhang. A few men sit slouched there, their shoulders touching their expressions, emptied of everything but exhaustion. One rubs his eyes with a trembling hand. Another scratches at his sleeve distractedly. A third stares at the ground, his gaze fixed on something you cannot see. From the perspectives of modern scholars, interpretations vary widely on whether the workhouse system provided structural relief for the poor or deepened the suffering it meant to ease. Watching these silent figures, you sense why opinions diverge so strongly. A low whistle sounds from an unseen corner, and you turn to see a caretaker locking a side door. His keyring clinks softly as he pockets it. He nods curtly at you, not unkindly, but with a look that says he has no extra attention to spare. He walks toward the front gate with a deliberate pace, his steps measured, like someone who has performed this routine countless times. You pause beside the building, letting the fog curl between your ankles. The workhouse looms at your side, like a stone sentinel, unyielding and unmoved by the human stories orbiting it. A woman coughs softly near the entrance. A man wipes his nose on his sleeve. A faint scraping of chairs echoes faintly from inside. All these sounds form a soft, sorrowful symphony. You step away from the gate and follow a path that leads around the rear of the building. Here the smell of boiled grains lingers in the air, mixed with the faint scent of laundry hung in a cramped yard behind iron bars. A woman carrying a basket of linens hurries across the yard, glancing over her shoulder as if checking whether she has completed her task quickly enough. You feel the urgency in her steps. Beyond the yard, the slum sprawls forward once more, its uneven roofs and winding alleys seeming almost inviting after the heavy stillness of the workhouse. You turn your gaze away from the building's stark outline and breathe deeply, finding comfort in the softer noises of daily life returning to your ears. The workhouse remains behind you, tall and silent, watching over the street, like a grim reminder of what waits at the edge of desperation. Its presence lingers even as you walk on, guiding you toward the next hidden corner of the slum, where different stories wait beneath the shifting fog. You follow the curve of the slum's outer lane until the scenery begins to shift, revealing a mixture of languages, faces, and textures stitched together like an accidental tapestry. The fog thins slightly, allowing the light to fall in soft pools across the cobblestones. You hear voices speaking in rhythms unfamiliar to your ear, the syllables rising and falling in melodies carried from far-off homelands. Here the immigrant quarters unfold in a vibrant hush, a place where newcomers arrive, with hope tucked under the same roofs that shelter their exhaustion. You step into a street lined with narrow shops whose signs hang crookedly above doorways. Some are painted in languages you do not recognize, their letters looping or angular, each stroke carrying its own quiet pride. A bakery exudes the scent of sweet bread, spiced with something warm and foreign. You catch a hint of cinnamon, then something peppery, then a note you cannot place at all. People queue at the counter trading coins, and hurried greetings before vanishing back into the maze. A cluster of women sit on wooden stools outside a laundry-lined courtyard, their hands busy with sewing, peeling vegetables, or nursing infants wrapped in wool. They speak in soft tones, passing stories between each other, like threads woven into a shared fabric. The glow in their eyes tells you that community survives here, not because conditions are kind, but because connection is necessary. From descriptions written in community assistance ledgers, the immigrant lanes were often portrayed as pockets of astonishing resilience, where people rebuilt familiar rituals despite the hostile conditions of the city around them. Watching these women work together, you sense that resilience takes shape. A child runs past you holding a wooden toy carved in a style you do not associate with London at all. Intrigued, you step toward a doorway where an elderly man sits on a crate carving another toy with steady hands. His knife moves gently, shaving curls of wood that scatter across the stones. A small, rarely documented detail you once encountered resurfaces. Some immigrant craftsmen preserved carving techniques from their homelands and quietly passed them to local children who gathered around out of fascination. You see that legacy now in the delicate patterns etched into the toy the child clutches. Farther along the street, two men speak quietly beside a pushcart filled with bolts of fabric. Their gestures are animated, weaving through the conversation with an energy that makes the air warmer. When a customer approaches, they unfurl the cloth to reveal colours more brilliant than anything else in the slum-deep reds, bright blues, gold patterns catching the light. Their pride in the fabric briefly softens the weariness in their posture. You drift toward a dim archway where the sounds of cooking drift outward. Someone stirs a pot over a small fire, the aroma earthy and rich. A boy stands beside the cook, sprinkling crushed spices from a paper cone. You watch a brief argument break out over how much seasoning should be added. It ends with laughter, the kind that makes strangers feel briefly like family. Beneath the archway, people crouch around shared plates, tearing bread, dipping it, exchanging nods of approval. As you continue, you hear music played on an unfamiliar stringed instrument. The notes glide into the air with a soft vibrato that makes the hair on your arms rise gently. A man sits on the steps of a stoop playing with eyes closed, his face tilted upward as if listening for memories carried in the sound. A woman hums beside him, rocking a baby in her arms. The melody swirls around you like a warm breeze. At the street corner, a man pins laundry to a sagging line. He works quickly, fingers moving in a practiced rhythm. When he sees you watching, he shrugs as if to say that chores remain the same, no matter the language spoken at home. It is a simple truth that binds every district together. A narrow lane branches off, lined with cramped boarding rooms, where multiple families squeeze into each doorway. Through one open door, you glimpse a group kneeling on woven mats, speaking prayers that blend quiet chants with the soft rustle of fabric. Their voices rise not in lamentation, but in persistent hope. From accounts left behind by reformers, it is known that faith communities in these quarters often served as calm anchors, helping newcomers reorient themselves in the overwhelming city. Looking at the solemn reverence in the room, you feel how meaningful those rituals must be. A sudden burst of laughter draws your attention to a small workshop where workers dye cloth in large vats. Their hands are stained bright blue and crimson, their aprons splattered like accidental artwork. One worker dips cloth into a vat while recounting a story that makes the others bend over with laughter. You smile despite yourself, warmed by their joy. Nearby, a woman arranges jars of pickled vegetables and dried fruits on a shelf. The colours are vibrant, and the aromas drifting from the jars make your stomach stir slightly. She gestures for a passerby to try a sample. The passerby nods eagerly and bites into a piece, his eyes widening in pleasant surprise. You notice a pair of teenagers practicing English from a tattered book, stumbling over pronunciations but giggling each time they manage to get a phrase right. You hear them repeat a greeting to each other. Their laughter blends into the tapestry of conversations surrounding you. Across the street, a man sits on overturned crates with several others gathered around him. He holds a letter written in a script you do not recognize. He reads it aloud, his voice trembling faintly. The listeners lean in, soaking in every word, their faces softening with emotion. A relative's message, perhaps, a blessing, a memory, a reminder of a homeland left behind. You feel a sudden tenderness settle in your chest. A moment later, the atmosphere shifts as two men begin a heated discussion about wages. Their voices rise, hands gesturing sharply. The dispute never escalates beyond argument, but the intensity lingers. Modern analysts examining these mixed districts often reach different conclusions about how well these enclaves supported their members, with interpretations diverging on whether community solidarity outweighed the struggles caused by cultural friction. Listening to the sharp exchange dissolve into weary sighs, you sense the delicate balance between unity and strain. You continue onward and observe a woman sweeping the stones outside her doorway. She pauses, smiles faintly at you, then resumes her sweeping with long, slow strokes. The simple gesture feels like a welcome, a reminder that even in hardship, hospitality persists. The street gradually narrows again, folding back into the deeper knots of the slum. The sounds of multiple languages fade into a more blended murmur as you retrace your steps toward the next pocket of hidden life. You carry with you the warmth, the music, the scent of spices, and the deep layered stories that make these immigrant quarters glow softly beneath the fog. You continue along the winding street until the air grows warmer, carrying with it a smoky heaviness that settles low across your chest. The fog thins here, not because the day has improved, but because heat radiates from the workshops clustered tightly together, each one exhaling a steady plume of soot into the sky. You follow the faint metallic clatter drifting between the buildings, and soon you step into a stretch of the slum where small industries pulse quietly behind warped doors and rattling shutters. This is where chimneys rule the skyline, rising like crooked fingers, pointing toward a sky permanently stained with labour. The scent hits you first. Coal smoke mingled with hot oil and the faint tang of metal filings. It is not pleasant, but it is strangely grounding, anchoring you in the rhythm of a district that works long before the richer parts of London bother to untie their curtains. You step past a workshop with its door cracked open, revealing men stooped over benches lit by yellow lamps. Sparks leap occasionally, from their tools vanishing before they reach the floor. From the recollections of people who lived through the era, one observation appears again and again in their memories. These small workshops were the backbone of entire neighbourhoods, offering low wages but near constant work to those who could endure the conditions. Standing here, you sense the truth breathing through every sound. You glance upward at the rooftops. Dozens of chimneys line the sky, coughing out dark smoke in slow, grudging bursts. Some lean precariously, patched with bricks of mismatched colour. Others spit out wind-blown sparks that vanish into the fog. Beneath these crude towers, workers move with the synchronized familiarity of people who have performed the same motions since childhood. A man hauling coal nods towards you, his face streaked with ash. He lifts another sack onto his shoulder with a grunt that fades quickly into the noise. As you continue, the sounds change. Hammering, steam hissing, wood snapping under pressure. The district feels alive, as if every wall vibrates with its own heartbeat. You pass a door left ajar, and a woman inside turns a wheel press with steady strength. The machine creaks rhythmically, the sound echoing through the alley. A child stands beside her, handing her pieces of cloth dipped in dye. Their hands are stained deep blue, the colour clinging to their skin like a stubborn memory. A few steps farther, you notice a narrow yard where men assemble wooden crates. Their hammers rise and fall in predictable rhythm, building a cadence that travels through the walls and into your bones. One worker whistles as he taps down a nail. His tune feels oddly cheerful against the monotony of the task. A detail passed between old residents of the slums resurfaces faintly. Some yards relied on whistling or singing to keep workers alert, especially in workshops prone to accidents. Hearing the melody swirl around the yard, you can imagine how the practice endured. You step beneath a low arch and find a blacksmith crouched beside a small furnace. He holds a glowing bar of metal, with tongs its surface shimmering like molten sunrise. He hammers with a grace that seems impossible given the cramped space. Sweat glistens across his forehead. When he notices you watching, he lifts the metal to inspect his progress, the glow reflecting in his eyes. His movements have the easy confidence of someone who knows fire intimately. Along the next stretch of alley, a group of women lean over sewing machines that whir in a steady mechanical drone. Their machines sit atop makeshift tables built from discarded planks. The women's heads bow and lift like metronomes, following the rhythm of the spindles. Fabrics pile around them in chaotic stacks, cloth destined for uniforms, aprons, or cheap dresses to be sold in markets. You notice one woman pausing to stretch her neck, pressing her fingers gently against a knot of pain. She takes a breath, then dives back into her work with a renewed focus. A child runs past carrying a box nearly twice his size. He disappears into a workshop, returning moments later, with the box now empty. His pace is swift, almost urgent. You can hear a man's voice calling after him, reminding him of another task. Children in these areas often slipped between formal labour and informal chores without clear distinction, their energy fueling the machinery of the district. Another scent interrupts your thoughts. Hot tar. You follow it toward a shed, where two men stir a bubbling pot with long sticks. Steam rises like thick mist, carrying the sharp scent that catches in your throat. They pour the mixture into wooden moulds, creating blocks later used for patching roofs around the slum. One man rubs his forehead with a tar-stained glove, leaving a streak across his brow. A tall chimney ahead belches smoke that curls along the alley before drifting skyward. The grime clings to your clothes, settling into the fibres. You brush at your sleeve, but the dark dust smears further. The workers nearby barely notice. Their shoulders roll forward with habitual fatigue, their breaths heavy. Through the haze, you glimpse a man lifting a crate of scraps onto a cart. Behind him, a woman stacks bundles of cut twine. The two work in near silence, sharing only nods and small gestures that carry meaning without words. Near the corner, a small crowd gathers around a craftsman repairing broken lanterns. His tools are delicate, almost surgical, and he bends over each lantern with careful concentration. When he finishes fixing one, he tests it by lighting the wick. A warm glow fills the glass, softening the alley's harsh edges. People murmur in appreciation. Many cannot afford new lanterns, so this repairer becomes an essential thread in the slum's web of survival. On the opposite side of the lane, a group of labourers unload sacks from a wagon. Their movements are synchronised, driven by habit more than direction. One slips briefly, catching himself against the wagon's side. His laughter breaks the monotony. The others join in, their voices rising above the grind of industry. These small bursts of humour illuminate a truth that outsiders rarely acknowledge. Even in hardship, camaraderie thrives. You pause near a workshop where a woman oversees a small boiler. Steam hisses from its valves. She checks the pressure with a steady eye before feeding scraps into the firebox. Her sleeves are rolled to her elbows, revealing arms shaped by years of work. She wipes soot from her cheek, leaving a pale streak across her skin. A quiet conviction radiates from her posture. As you continue down the alley, you hear two men discussing the future of the district's industries. Their tones rise and fall, one optimistic, the other doubtful. The exchange reflects a broader uncertainty. Interpretations of these industrial corners vary widely depending on who recounts them, with different voices framing them, either as opportunities for stability or arenas of relentless strain. You listen as their debate dissolves into the clatter of machinery around you. You emerge from the alley and step onto a slightly wider path where the air grows cooler. The chimneys remain visible behind you, their plumes drifting like slow-moving ghosts across the sky. The hum of industry fades but does not disappear. It lingers in your ears, a reminder of the countless hands that shape the city from these hidden spaces. You take a breath, letting the fog rejoin your steps as you continue deeper into the slum, feeling the story shift once more, with every turn of the cobblestones. You follow a bend in the alley until the sounds of hammering and steam fade, replaced by quieter footsteps and the low murmur of people gathered in discussion. The fog lifts just enough for you to make out the silhouettes of men and women holding notebooks, lanterns and rolled-up pamphlets. Their clothing is neater than the locals, their boots cleaner, their eyes too alert for this hour. You recognize the type immediately. These are the sanitary reformers, the philanthropists, the investigators, the well-meaning critics wandering into the slum armed with questions they hope will fix what they barely understand. You slow your pace, curious about the careful dance between outsiders and residents unfolding here. You step toward a small gathering where a woman in a long coat listens intently to a local mother describing the dampness in her home. The reformer jots notes rapidly, her pencil tapping the page like a nervous heartbeat. The mother gestures toward her doorway, pointing out mold creeping along the ceiling and the leaking pipe that drips regardless of weather. From the domestic recollections passed between families of the time, people often remembered these visiting women as the only outsiders who truly noticed the discomforts that had become invisible to everyone else. Hearing the quiet sincerity of their exchange, you feel the truth of that perception. A few feet away, a man with spectacles kneels near a drainage channel, examining the water trickling through it. He scoops some into a jar, holds it to the light, and frowns. His companion murmurs something about filtration and infrastructural complexity. Their voices mix oddly with the slum's usual sounds. Residents walk past them with cautious glances, some curious, others indifferent. A fragment of internal lore among old locals once claimed that investigators often left with more questions than answers. The slum had a way of resisting simple explanations. Watching them puzzle over the murky water, you sense how that belief might have formed. You step deeper into the lane, where a group of reformers gather around a doorway while taking turns inspecting the cramped living space inside. They whisper observations to each other, their voices soft but tinged with urgency. A woman emerges carrying a lantern, guiding them toward a courtyard with an overflowing rubbish heap. The sight makes several visitors recoil, covering their noses with handkerchiefs. The guide simply shrugs, accustomed to a reality these newcomers can barely grasp. Across the street, a reformer engages a group of children in conversation. The children shuffle their feet, shyly giggling when he mispronounces their names. He asks about their chores, their meals, their sleep. A boy answers honestly, while the others offer exaggerated stories, half for mischief and half for attention. The reformer writes everything down without blinking. As you observe, you recall that the way these interviews were recorded varied wildly from one investigator to another, leaving later interpreters uncertain about which descriptions reflected daily truth and which were coloured by the assumptions of the visitor. Watching the boy grin slyly as he adds another embellishment, you understand how easily records could bend. You move along the row until you reach a makeshift desk set up outside a tavern, where a young woman arranges stacks of pamphlets. Their titles warn of urban decay, public hygiene, and the moral duty of improvement. She hands them to passers-by with polite insistence. Most locals glance at the papers, shrug, and keep walking. One man tucks the pamphlet under his arm with a nod of appreciation. Another rolls his eyes and mutters something unrepeatably annoyed. You sense that these leaflets mean far more to the writer than to the intended audience. Further down the alley, an older reformer sketches the outlines of buildings and pathways in a notebook. He pauses often, scanning the area with narrowed eyes. The map grows increasingly detailed with each stroke. A group of children gathers behind him, watching curiously, before eventually losing interest and running off. He lifts his head to track their movements, as though hoping their actions might reveal something important. He scribbles a note, then another, his brow furrowing. Near a row of small dwellings, a woman in an apron stands with arms folded, scrutinizing two reformers, who peer into her water bucket with excessive enthusiasm. She clears her throat pointedly and they leap back with embarrassed apologies. Her expression softens only when they ask about the cost of soap and fuel. She answers in brisk, practical terms, and they record every word. She returns to her chores immediately, after neither impressed nor offended by their presence. As you walk, you overhear a pair of visitors engaged in a heated discussion about the slum's future. One insists on demolition, and rebuilding, the other speaks passionately about improving sanitation without uprooting communities. Their disagreement mirrors the broader uncertainty that continues to shape interpretations of these reform movements. Different observers arrive at conflicting conclusions depending on which stories they choose to emphasize. Listening to the debate drift across the street, you sense how fiercely opinions diverge behind polite intentions. You turn onto another path where a reformer examines the cracked walls of a lodging house. His fingertips trace the fractures with a mix of fascination and horror. He murmurs something about structural neglect before stepping back to avoid a loose brick. A group of residents stands nearby, exchanging amused glances. One woman smirks and whispers that the walls have survived worse winters than the man ever will. You smile despite yourself drawn to the dry humour that blooms even in hardship. A short distance ahead, a man with a cane listens to a widow recounting her struggles to feed her children. Her story is quiet, measured. He bows his head respectfully and presses a small envelope of coins into her hand. She hesitates, then accepts with a trembling nod. These moments, though, rare linger in the memories of those who lived here, reminding them that compassion sometimes arrived disguised as strangers with unfamiliar accents. You continue on, weaving between reformers and locals who engage in an awkward choreography of curiosity, caution, and necessity. Children dart around them with giggles. Adults eye them with skepticism, softened by occasional gratitude. The slum absorbs their presence with reluctant tolerance. As the street begins to narrow again, the reformers drift behind you, their conversations fading, like echoes carried by the fog. You feel their intentions, a mixture of earnest goodwill, limited understanding, and restless ambition, linger in the air. Their footsteps recede until all that remains is the softer, more familiar rhythm of the slum itself. You take one more breath-tasting smoke and damp stone before moving toward the next stretch of night, where the city's pulse shifts again in the dimming light. You move away from the reformers' lingering chatter and step into a quieter, narrower artery of the slum where the light dims and the ground seems to absorb every footstep. The houses crowd closer here, their upper floors bending forward as if eavesdropping on the street below. You sense a faint shift in the atmosphere, the kind that asks you to keep your hands in sight and your pace steady. A soft metallic tap echoes from somewhere ahead, followed by a low murmur. This is where the night patrols begin their rounds, where constables trace steady arcs through the maze and try to keep a fragile line between order and the chaos pressing in on all sides. You follow the curve of the lane until you see a lantern bobbing gently along the path. A uniformed constable approaches at an unhurried pace, his boots clicking against the cobblestones in a rhythm that feels both practiced and weary. His coat hangs heavy from the damp. When he glances toward you, his expression carries the resigned patience of someone who has walked these streets too many nights to be startled by much. From the everyday stories preserved through those who lived alongside the police presence, people often recalled that patrolmen in these districts spent more time mediating disputes and calming tensions than making formal arrests. Watching the constable stop to greet a shivering boy beneath a doorway, you see traces of that memory reflected in his movements. You step aside as he passes, noticing how his lantern illuminates the stones, one trembling circle at a time. The smoke from its wick twists upward, curling into the thick fog. A few doors down, another patrolman emerges from a side alley, his shoulders slightly hunched against the cold. He taps his truncheon lightly on the wall as he walks, a soft cue meant less to intimidate and more to signal his presence. As you observe them from a quiet distance, a subtle detail whispered through the neighbourhood's surviving anecdotes surfaces. In your thoughts, some officers learned informal signals to reassure familiar residents, tapping walls or humming brief notes to avoid startling anyone awake. A little farther on, two constables stand beneath a sagging wooden awning, speaking softly while scanning the intersecting paths. One rubs his palms together for warmth, the other keeps his gaze fixed on a pair of men arguing at the far end of the alley. Their conversation never rises above a cautious murmur. A few passers-by nod politely as they walk past. Despite their uniforms, the constables blend almost seamlessly into the slum's nightscape, like fixtures woven into the district's uneasy equilibrium. You continue deeper into the alley, letting your eyes adjust as the lanterns grow fewer. The next stretch is dimmer, shadowed by overhanging balconies. You hear a faint scraping sound and pause. A constable rounds the corner, guiding a staggering man home, with a steady hand on his elbow. The man mutters something you cannot decipher. The officer responds in a calm, measured tone. They move slowly, carefully, like two exhausted dancers in a tired routine. In countless nightly accounts, residents later remembered that many officers served as reluctant caretakers, shepherding the drunk, the lost, and the frightened back to safety. A few steps later, you hear raised voices. Two women quarrel over a broken basket, spilling onions onto the ground. Their words crack sharply through the stillness, punctuated by the thud of a rolling onion tapping against the stones. A constable approaches them at an even pace. He kneels, gathers the scattered onions, and hands them back without scolding. The argument softens instantly, dissolving into embarrassed mumbles. The officer tips his hat and continues on. Watching this simple interaction, you sense why memories of the slum's police work are so varied. Some recall conflict, others quiet assistance. You keep moving until the alley forks into two narrow paths. A constable stands at the intersection, leaning lightly on his lantern post as he scans the converging shadows. His breath floats in the air, drifting upward, like pale ribbon. He nods once when you pass, acknowledging your presence without expectation. Behind him, a cat weaves through a pile of crates, pausing to inspect the constable's boots before slipping back into darkness. Beyond the fork, the street broadens just enough for a small patrol group to gather. 3 officers stand together, comparing notes in hushed tones. You catch fragments of their conversation, mentions of missing coal, a domestic quarrel, a shopkeeper alarmed by noises on his roof. One officer strikes a match to relight his lantern. The flare briefly illuminates the alley and exposes the weariness etched into their faces. A few paces away, a young patrolman leans on a wall with an air of restless uncertainty. His eyes dart between windows, doorways, and the edges of shadow. The slum has not yet shaped him into the quiet calm of his older colleagues. His hand rests lightly on his belt, fingers tapping involuntarily. When an older constable calls his name, he startles and hurries forward, eager to appear competent. You sense his nerves like a small tremor in the air. You continue walking until you reach a street where laundry lines sway gently overhead, their cloth ends brushing the night. A constable pauses beneath them, scanning a nearby doorway where a light still burns. He listens, not intruding, just present. The glow of his lantern casts a pale halo around him. From those who later documented their impressions of these patrols, interpretations differ widely, depending on the observer's position. Some describe officers as guardians holding the slum's frayed edges together, while others paint them as instruments of outside authority. Watching this man stand quietly in the half-light, the contrasting interpretations settle into your awareness like 2 overlapping truths. You wander forward until the smell of smoke thickens again. A small bonfire crackles beside a group of workers warming their hands. A patrolman stands near them, talking about yesterday's lost wages, his tone conversational rather than official. The workers laugh at something he says, though you cannot catch the joke. Their laughter warms the otherwise cold space. Moments like these reveal the slum's strange ability to blur the lines between roles, neighbours, workers, and officers, forming temporary circles of shared exhaustion and reluctant companionship. As you walk away from the fire's glow, you hear the slow beat of boots trailing behind you, another patrol beginning its lap. You do not turn around. You simply let the rhythm settle into step with your breath. The presence of the constable, steady and imperfect, becomes part of the slum's nighttime heartbeat. At the next corner, the noise ebbs. The lantern light behind you dims until only a faint shimmer remains on the cobbles. You step into a narrower stretch, letting the quiet swallow your footsteps. The patrol continues behind you, its echoes fading softly, like a pulse that grows distant but never fully disappears. You exhale into the mist and move forward deeper into the night, where other shadows gather and other stories lie waiting in the dimness. You turn down a sliver of a passageway, where the fog hangs low, almost brushing your knees as you step forward. The slum feels different at this hour, looser at the seams, as if the night air has unfastened the district's tight laces. Lamps dim behind curtains, shutters creak open or closed without warning, and the voices that fill the daytime hush into murmurs that glide between walls, like cautious ghosts. As you ease into the deeper shadows, you feel the city exhale, and you follow its breath into the mystery that only midnight reveals. You move slowly, letting the darkness settle over your shoulders. Far above, laundry lines sway in the faint breeze, their edges fluttering like tired flags. The skies are muddy grey, stirred only by the faint glow of distant factories. You pause beneath a sagging balcony where a couple sits close together, whispering words that melt into the night before you can catch them. The street smells of soot-damp wool and something faintly sweet, perhaps fruit, someone dropped earlier in the day, now bruised and forgotten. As you walk, you hear the gentle scuff of footsteps behind you. A cat leaps from a windowsill landing with the softest thump, its eyes gleaming like twin lanterns. It watches you for a moment before slipping into a gap beneath a door. Beyond that door, you catch the faint rumble of voices, low and steady, like a lullaby spoken in a tongue the street understands intuitively. You follow that sound until the alley widens into a dim courtyard. A group of night workers sits in a loose circle around a brazier whose flames flicker with a weary glow. Their faces soften in the light as they pass tin cups between themselves, sharing a warmth that goes beyond the heat. From the kinds of common stories still found in older collections, aimed at general readers of the period, you often encounter the observation that people who worked through the deepest hours of night formed bonds that daylight rarely understood. Watching these workers lean in close around their tiny island of fire, you sense how true that is. You keep to the shadows, careful not to disturb them. A man lifts his cup in a small salute as he notices you pass. His eyes carry both fatigue and resilience. The fire crackles lightly, sending a ribbon of sparks upward before they fizzle into the damp air. The smell of burnt wood clings to your clothes as you continue down the corridor leading out of the courtyard. The next alley grows quieter, though not entirely still. A woman stands on a doorstep combing her hair beneath the lantern light, the comb catching now and then on a stubborn knot. A small detail known mostly among long-time residents of these narrow streets lingers in memory. Certain households kept late-night grooming habits because morning hours were swallowed by chores, and labour leaving nights as the only time to tend to themselves. Watching her slow, deliberate strokes, you feel the dignity of that small ritual. You move on, letting the alley draw you deeper. A pair of men sit playing a quiet game with carved wooden pieces. Their murmured conversation rises and falls like a tide washing against stone. A lantern beside them throws long shadows that stretch across the walls, like dark reeds swaying in the wind. One man slams his piece down triumphantly, but muffles his victory cheer so as not to wake a baby sleeping somewhere close by. You continue and nearly stumble when you turn a corner too quickly. A woman steps out of a doorway, at the same moment holding a pail of stew that steams into the cold air. She nods politely before hurrying on, her footsteps soft as she disappears into a side passage. The smell of her stew lingers earthy and warm. A few steps later, you hear faint music drifting down from an open attic window. The tune is slow, wistful, played on a simple flute whose notes float like feathers settling on water. You pause beneath the window, letting the melody wrap around you. The player pauses, breathes, and begins again, the tune gaining a softness shaped by the late hour. The slum seems to listen with you, its walls absorbing the sound. In the distance, two figures argue in hushed tones near a shuttered shop. Their gestures are sharp, but their voices stay low, mindful of sleeping children and watchful neighbours. As you pass, the argument quiets and dissolves into sighs. The tension does not linger long. Night has a way of smoothing the rough edges of conflict. You step into another lane where the lanterns burn lower, their flames thinned by lack of oil. This darkness feels heavier, more contemplative. A man sits alone on a doorstep, smoking a pipe that glows brighter with each inhale. He stares into the distance, as though searching for answers hidden somewhere beyond the alley's end. He notices you and offers a faint gesture of acknowledgement before returning to his thoughts. A faint scraping sound behind you makes you turn. A pair of siblings drag a mattress through the alley, laughing quietly as they struggle to keep it from folding. They whisper conspiratorially, plotting where to place it for the night. You smile as they disappear into a doorway, their laughter echoing softly after them. On the far side of the street, an older woman leans out a window to shake crumbs from a pan. The crumbs fall in a tiny cascade, drawing the attention of a dog who trots eagerly beneath her. She chuckles and tosses him a small scrap. Her chuckle rings warm and low, like an unexpected pocket of sunshine hidden within the night. You continue walking, your footsteps steady, your senses tuned to the slum's midnight rhythm. The air carries whispers of sootwood smoke and the final sighs of the day folding into sleep. As you pass a doorway half covered by a torn curtain, you hear two voices discussing the future of the district, each offering a different picture of what lies ahead. The way they describe it, you can tell that interpretations of this neighbourhood's destiny depend heavily on whose eyes are doing the imagining. You move on until the night thickens around you, soft and expectant, as though the slum is cradling its secrets more tightly the deeper you walk. You inhale slowly, letting the dense quiet settle into your chest. Midnight, in these alleys, is not a single moment, but an unfolding, gentle, shadowed, and full of lives still stirring in the half-light. You take one final look at the trembling lantern behind you, then step deeper into the dark, where dawn waits somewhere far ahead, preparing to pull the city awake all over again. You keep moving through the thick folds of night until a faint silvering touches the rooftops. The slum lies in a kind of suspended hush, as if holding its breath just before morning breaks open the day. Your steps feel softer now, cushioned by the quiet. The fog thins little by little, drifting upward like a curtain being lifted. You reach a broader street, where the first hints of dawn spill across the cobblestones in thin, hesitant streaks. The city stirs not in a sudden burst, but in a slow, reluctant awakening. A woman unlatches her shutters with a clack that echoes down the lane. She stretches her arms over her head, face turned toward the faint light. Behind her, someone yawns loudly, and another mutters something about needing water before the well becomes crowded. From the sorts of widely circulated urban commentaries sold in bookstores at the time, there's a recurring point that surfaces often early mornings. In poorer districts had a distinctive tempo, beginning with soft movements and whispered chores before spiralling into the packed busyness of the day. Standing here, you feel that tempo rising around you, delicate and deliberate. You shift your gaze toward the street as a few figures emerge from doorways. A man steps into the open, carrying a bundle of wood balanced neatly on his shoulder. He whistles a short phrase that blends with the chirp of waking birds hidden in the rooftops. Nearby, a woman tosses a handful of crumbs onto the ground, inviting pigeons that descend in fluttering waves. Their wings brush the air with gentle urgency. A curious characteristic noted among those who grew up in these blocks once hinted that the neighbourhood seemed to greet birds before it greeted people. Watching the flurry settle around the crumbs, you can see why the idea lingered. You turn toward a row of workshops where dim lamps flicker back to life. Workers begin filing inside, rubbing their hands together to warm their fingers. A cart rolls past you, the wheels rumbling faintly on the uneven stones. Its driver nods in greeting sleep, still clinging to his eyes. A few women gather at a communal pump, their chatter rising and falling in accents shaped by every corner of the city and far beyond. They trade complaints about the weather, about yesterday's prices, about the chores waiting for them inside. Their voices braid together like threads in an old familiar cloth. As you move farther, a small group of boys runs past carrying sacks of coal. Their laughter mixes with grunts of effort. One stumbles slightly, regains balance, and grins at his friends before continuing. A girl sweeps a doorway, pausing now and then to inspect a stone or a bottle cap the dawn light reveals. The street brightens minute by minute, each window reflecting the morning's pale glow. Two men stand beside a wagon debating the condition of the day's goods, voices calm but insistent. Their gestures trace invisible shapes in the air. A woman exits her home, with a bowl of batter handing it to a neighbour who will cook flatbread on a small iron plate out front. The exchange is brief but warm. Shared tasks help the morning unfold more easily. Near the alley's end, a small crowd gathers around a man reading a newspaper aloud. His voice carries through the lane, drawing nods, groans, and amused snorts. The way his listeners react reminds you that differing viewpoints about the slum's prospects have long existed. The lens one uses to look at these streets shapes the story told, and perspectives rarely converge neatly. Listening to the mixture of agreement and disagreement around him, you feel how layered the district's identity truly is. A final hush moves across the rooftops as the sun slips above the horizon. The fog scatters like dust shaken from an old cloak. You inhale, filling your lungs with the cool, damp air that still holds faint traces of smoke laundry soap and warm bread beginning to rise somewhere nearby. The city feels larger in the morning, quieter, but also somehow brimming with countless small beginnings. You take a slow step forward, letting the slum reveal itself in its full morning light. The day opens like a weary eye, blinking awake, ready to begin the cycle that has shaped these streets for decades. And now, as the last echoes of dawn settle gently over the rooftops, allow yourself to loosen the tension coiled in your shoulders. Let the city quiet itself inside your mind. The cobblestones soften beneath your feet. The fog becomes slower, lighter, drifting like folds of silk stirred by a faint breeze. The slum you've walked through begins to fade, not abruptly, but like a dim lantern, gradually lowering its flame. The sounds you heard through these alleys, murmured laughter, quiet footsteps, a kettle's distant whistle, stretch out into softer shapes. They no longer tug at your senses. Instead, they melt together, forming a gentle hum that sits just at the edge of silence. You breathe in slowly. The air feels warmer now, and the scents that once clung to the streets dissolve into something calm and distant, like faint memories settling into still water. Allow your mind to drift. Picture the rooftops shrouded in the earliest morning, glow the windows dimming as lanterns go out one by one. Those narrow corridors you explored loosen their grip, opening into wider, quieter spaces. Every doorway, every corner, every whisper becomes softer, as if wrapped in layers of cotton. Let those images float far behind you. Your breath grows deeper, steadier. The city's weight lifts from your chest. Picture the sky brightening just enough to guide you toward rest. You've walked through a world full of noise and struggle and tiny pockets of tenderness, and now all of it recedes, gently becoming distant ripples of another time. Let your eyelids be heavy. Let your thoughts be slow like drifting leaves on a quiet river. You are safe. You are still. You are already drifting towards sleep. Sweet dreams.